Welcome, everyone, to a brand new episode of the Level Story Podcast, a branch of Level Story Magazine, which is a digital magazine that seeks to critique and celebrate stories in video games. My name is Danielle, creator and curator of Level Story, and I am joined once again by Sam, the game professor.
Hi, that's me.
How are you doing tonight?
Well, yeah.
Loaded question.
These days, yeah, it is. But, I'm getting by. Things are all right. How are you?
Yeah. Same here. Getting by is the best way to put it. For those listening, we're actually recording this at the end of October. I don't know when the episode will be coming out, probably sometime after the election. So,
So
maybe
when you hear this, we will either be doing a little better or way, way worse.
Right. So, I mean, it's not that far away, so kind of scary to think about. But yes, that's where we're at right now. Especially looking in the future as well. Listening back to this episode will be interesting.
I'm sure.
Yeah. But before we get into this episode, just a quick reminder that if you would like to support Level Story, there are a variety of ways you can do so. You can subscribe via Patreon, levelstory.net/subscribe. You can also do little things like if you want to purchase something on Humble Bundle via our affiliate link, that's levelstory.net/humble-bundle. Or you can also purchase something via Bookshop, or I shouldn't say something. If you'd like to purchase a book via Bookshop, you can head on over to levelstory.net/bookshop, or you can buy Level Story a coffee, ko-fi.com/levelstory for that. And if you want to get in contact with Level Story, head on over to levelstory.net/contact, and you can either write a message or leave a voicemail. So lots of variety of things there. And if you are interested in any of the topics that we talk about this episode, you can find the links in our show notes. And that will be at levelstory.net/podcast/LOU-reflection. LOU standing for, of course, our topic, Last of Us, The Last of Us. But yeah, and with that, let's quickly get into some housekeeping, which will be a quick little segment before we jump into the episode. Housekeeping is basically just a section where I go over stuff going on with Level Story, and it's going to be a short one this time around. Just a quick reminder, you can purchase physical issues of the magazine now. Head on over to levelstory.net/shop for that. And we're having a mini mag come out in November, all about The Last of Us Left Behind. So that should be out mid-November, hopefully. Fingers crossed, we'll see. But yeah, so that is something to look forward to. And that is housekeeping, so not much this time around. And with that, it's time to get jiggy with it. That was a cover of Spiral Mountain from Banjo-Kazooie by the fantastic Gab Ocarina. Check out his YouTube channel, youtube.com/c/GabOcarina96. And again, that link will be in the show notes. All right, so this is a segment of the show where we get jiggy with it, meaning we talk about things that we're excited about going on in the games industry, things we're excited for, or just stuff that's going on that is making us happy. So why don't you start, Sam? What's getting you
well,
jiggy?
for me, when you put it like that, I don't know if I'm happy about it because the pre-order situation is a mess and I don't actually have one set. But I'm excited about the PS5. The Xbox is happening too, but I have a powerful PC, which basically means that I can play all of the games that I would be playing on an Xbox, so I don't really care.
Yeah.
But I am quite excited about the PS5 just because, my priority in these things is always the exclusive games, so I'm excited about lower load times and all that stuff, but mostly I'm just excited to be getting sort of the next console with a new batch of cool, interesting PlayStation games. And I am particularly, the launch lineup is famously not that great on account of, I mean, most consoles don't have incredible launch lineups in the first place, but then there's also a pandemic happening
Right.
that has severely delayed a whole lot of games. So, even less than originally planned are actually going to be available on launch. It's not necessarily something that you got to have immediately. I just like having things immediately if I'm going to have them anyway.
Right.
But I am very, very excited for Demon's Souls because I played that back, when it was just this weird, cool, difficult, very good game on the PS3 before Dark Souls was a thing and anyone knew what From Software was. And I never finished it because it's a Souls game. It's very difficult. I've tried a couple times and I usually just end up burning out eventually, but I have always wanted to go back and finish it, and ever since the online servers went down, sort of just taking out that social element for cooperative play and sending messages and stuff, I just haven't been motivated to go back and do that because the experience is kind of messed up. So I'm very, very excited that it's getting remade on PS5, and that's definitely the first thing I'm going to be getting on it.
Oh, nice.
So yeah, we'll see when we'll see how long it takes for PS5s to actually become readily available. But my partner and I have been saving up, and we wanted to make sure that we'd be able to get one. So we're ready to go, and I'm excited about it eventually.
It is exciting. I mean, I was gonna say, so I've never played Demon Souls or Dark Souls, and I'm kind of scared because
understandable.
Yeah, because they've just been built up so much. But maybe that will be the one I start with. I'm not
if
sure
you ever want to, I mean, these games have sort of a quasi co-op mode, and it does make them way easier and, in my opinion, more fun personally. So if you if you need someone to sort of help guide you through and deal with their punishing difficulty, then hit me up. I'm happy to help with that. That's how my partner and I played through them, just by partnering up for each of the individual segments and helping each other get through one by one.
That's a great idea. I feel like certain games just need that, and they make it just being playing something co-op with somebody or just playing along with somebody makes a game, I mean, not necessarily more enjoyable, but just a different type of enjoyable. It makes it I don't know, just it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, and in a game like that, there's already this element of it's hard to do, and so there's a lot of pride and joy involved in actually accomplishing things, and that's just fun to share with other people. There are people who take the games real seriously and say that that's cheating or whatever, but I don't really care. I have a whole lot more fun playing those games with someone than without them, so that's that's cool. So anyway, yeah, if you want to try it, I mean, I've got I think I've got the first Dark Souls on PC too. There are options. If you ever want to try them, I'd be happy to. That might actually be fun to stream now that I think about it.
Oh my gosh, that would be interesting actually. I feel like the two games that you and I have talked about playing together is now Dark Souls or Demon Souls and Cuphead.
Oh gosh,
the two games.
The Dark Souls of animated side-scrolling shoot-'em-ups.
Right. So what are we setting ourselves up for? But maybe that's a good thing.
Yeah, that sounds fun. So
Exactly. Yeah, the PS5. What other games are you looking forward to?
I'm the Pathless looks pretty cool. It's by I forget if it's the same team or just a lot of the same people, but the people that made Abzu, and it has Austin Wintory doing the soundtrack. So I'm very excited about that. I'm generally just excited about games. Oh, Assassin's Creed Valhalla. I'm not happy with Ubisoft. Ubisoft has done a lot of bad things lately, so I might have to wait and get it used or something, so I'm not directly giving them money for it. I don't know, but I'm excited about that. And then, of course, just one of the things I enjoy about having a new console is the games that are coming out on both of them, but mine look pretty. I know that's very shallow, but I enjoy that. So definitely just kind of looking forward to being able to get sort of more updated versions of those. Plus, it's doing a thing where if you have PS Plus on the PS5, you get a collection of some of the most essential PS4 games for free.
Yeah.
You just have access to them as long as you have PS Plus. And that includes a few that I haven't played, Days Gone is on there. And some others. Monster Hunter World, which I honestly, like, I played Monster Hunter Tri for a little bit and absolutely hated it, so I haven't tried World yet, but if I have free access to it, I'll give it a shot.
Right.
So, that's exciting too.
Speaking of that, I don't know if you saw, but one of the free PS Plus games for November is Hollow Knight.
Yes.
And I'm like, oh my gosh, I haven't bought it yet, and I feel so good about that right now.
I know, right? That so often happens to me in the opposite, where like
right.
I finally break down. I'm like, oh well, it's on sale. I'll go ahead and get this game, and then a couple weeks later, it's like, hey, this is free on PlayStation.
Right.
So that's always nice to actually end up on the right side of that.
Exactly. Yeah, because I'm never on the right side of that usually.
Yeah.
So yeah, that'll be exciting. But
yeah, that's a really good one.
Yeah, I'm very excited. I always was kind of holding out to play it on the Switch, but
it's very good for that.
Yeah, exactly. It's just it just feels like one of those games. But honestly, I'm okay with having it for free on the PlayStation.
Yeah, it is also quite gorgeous. So nothing wrong with playing it on a big screen for sure.
That's true.
Very beautiful side scroller.
Yeah, I'm very excited for that. But yeah, the PS5. Unfortunately, I'm not going to pre-order it yet, but I'm going to wait a little bit. But I'm still really
nothing wrong with that. I mean, these new consoles are always more of an investment anyway. Like, honestly, Demon's Souls is the only thing that I super want to have immediately. It's just that I know I'm going to want to buy it before, it won't have a price drop for years anyway. So I'm just, I may as well do it now pretty much. But
and that's not coming to PS4, right? It's just PS5.
Right, yes.
Okay, yeah.
But, generally it just comes down to the fact that eventually there are going to be, even if I wasn't excited for that specifically, there are going to be games exclusive for it that I'm going to want. And, since I've planned on it and been saving up for it,
why not?
Yeah, exactly. But there's also just not necessarily a reason to jump on right now. It's more of a long-term thing. So. Yeah,
I was going to say, I had intended to buy it because of the Spider-Man game.
Right! Yeah, I'd forgotten Miles Morales is... Is that PS5 exclusive, or is it also on PS4?
It's also on PS4.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's why I ended up... I want to buy a PS5 so badly, but I got the game for PS4. Since there is a free upgrade for PS5, I figure it's not hurting anything. I'll wait for now. Because I did just upgrade not that long ago to a PS4 Pro, so
nice.
I'm gonna take it slow, but I'm very excited for it. I'm excited to see what new games are coming. Yeah, it's gonna be a great console. It looks like, at least.
Yeah. That's the thing, is you can always expect good games that you can only get on it. For like PlayStation and Nintendo were great at that. Xbox used to be, and they've gone a different direction with it, and I can respect that. It's not what I'm looking for. I'm happy with my PC if that's the thing, what they're going to do with that. So
yeah, I was going to say, I mean, I'm sorry to say this, but I'm just not a big Xbox person. And like you said, like, I'll play the games on PC. Though I did want to play that game Tell Me Why, which was
I forgot that was console exclusive to the Xbox.
Yeah, but
I still need to get that on PC.
Yeah, exactly. I'll get it on PC as well. But there was another game announced recently where it's like some kind of underwater game, I think. I forget what it is, but it looked gorgeous.
Yeah, I know that Xbox did manage to, like, they bought up a couple companies recently. Like, they got Ninja Theory, so they're apparently making a sequel to Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice, and that's going to be, just on Xbox and PC. So, good for them. They're doing better on that. The Xbox One had just I haven't touched it in ages because there aren't any games that I can only play on it,
Right. So. I just want, this is all I want. I just want Xbox and Nintendo to have more of harmony so that they can port Banjo-Kazooie games to the Switch. That's all I want.
That's very true. Right, I'd forgotten that Rare is owned by Microsoft now, and that gets complicated.
It does, and I want the madness to end. I just want Banjo-Kazooie.
Now that I think about it, that's also why we haven't gotten a good Star Fox game in a long time, isn't it? That's sad.
Yeah. Oh, I was going to say it's also the reason that we'll never, ever see a remake or a port of Diddy Kong Racing.
Oh, I didn't even realize that. Oh, boy.
Yeah, which makes... I mean, I still have my original N64. That's the only game I still own. For reasons I won't go into, but because you can't get it anywhere, and it's I want to play it sometimes. It's a fun little game.
Yeah.
So
honestly, once games could wait, because I don't know if I can say this on a podcast. Once games are no longer being manufactured, I have no problem with emulation.
Yeah.
I feel like if they're not actually selling it, then,
yeah.
fair game. But I know legally that is not true. Disclaimer, don't emulate games unless you own them, wink.
Right, yeah. Wink, wink. Yeah. And, well, actually, speaking of old games, that kind of leads into my topic, which is I kind of want to talk about Super Mario 35.
Yeah.
So, did you grow up playing Super Mario 64?
No, the first Mario I spent a lot of time on was actually Sunshine, which everyone hates because they're wrong.
Why do people hate it?
Honestly, I don't fully understand it. I've heard a lot of complaints about the camera, which I feel like is no worse than most other third-person cameras were at the time.
Have they played 64?
I know,
the camera's
right?
bad.
Yeah.
Well,
but I don't know.
Yeah, it's funny because I never played Sunshine. I played a little bit with the recent port to the Switch, but I also have never played Galaxy. And with 64, the only time I played that growing up was at my dentist office. They had it there, and I would just play it there. Yeah, and I never actually did anything with it. I just kind of walked around and explored, So I did buy it on the Wii Virtual Console, and I guess like the controller, I just never could get the hang of the controller when it came to those Virtual Console games. Like specifically like Donkey Kong Country, I remember I would usually to get gain speed or gain momentum, for example, I would hold down a certain button and then use another button to jump, and you couldn't remap buttons, so it was actually really difficult for me to actually move because they were in a place placed in a certain way that I just was like, I can't do it. I can't remap my memory. I can't do it. And the same thing was kind of with Super Mario 64. So I've been really waiting for a port to the Switch, and this was like the thing I was anticipating the most probably this year, besides obviously Final Fantasy 7 Remake.
Right.
But it's interesting talking about this because I did eventually play 64 and I beat it. And I really enjoyed it, but I'm kind of disappointed in Nintendo with their whole handling of this situation.
Yeah. Honestly, that's the reason I haven't bought it yet. I really want to because Sunshine... I love Sunshine personally, and it's got some fond memories for me from high school. And Galaxy is gorgeous. It's incredible. The soundtrack in particular has no business being in a Mario game. It's so dang beautiful. And I want to replay it too, but man, I also don't feel like giving Nintendo money for this weird Disney Vault nonsense.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing too. People have been speculating that, and I think they're right, that once this does go off the market, they're probably just going to list the games, including Galaxy 2, on the eShop. I find that very likely, but I guess we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I would hope so. I don't know. Nintendo's not great about game conservation. They're good about keeping their games around, but not very good at actually making them accessible. And
right.
This just kind of feels like it's like they're teasing it being better about it and then just shutting it down, and I kind of hate that. So right. I hope they do that, because if that's the case, then that's fine. I don't mind there being a sort of a limited edition, limited time physical version, and then you make the games available otherwise. Yeah, well, not only that, what you just said, really is my issue too. The fact that they didn't do much to actually fix up the games, and we were just talking about the camera. Oh my god, 64's camera is a nightmare. Yeah. I do remember people were saying they didn't do much to 64 at all, that they had actually done a little bit of restoration work on Galaxy and Sunshine, but just kind of plopped 64 into there, which is a little frustrating. Yeah. I feel like they could put a little more effort into that. It's a classic.
Well, I was going to say too, it's funny because I remember before this was announced, there was a lot of speculation about, what Nintendo was going to do and all these leaks. And my thought was, I wonder if they're going to port the original 64, or I guess there was like a DS version.
Yeah, that's actually how I played it in full for the first time.
Oh, okay. Yeah, and I was wondering like how they would go about that. And my thought was like, I want it to look good, but I also want it to like be in its original form, but also like in its original form, but functional. Like, and that's what I mean, like with the camera and stuff, and just like you said, just certain quality of life things they could have done, to fix it up. And but it is a good game. The platforming is just so intense, man.
It really can be, yeah. Yeah, I feel like they set a good standard for this sort of thing with the 3DS remakes of Zelda games, because those, at least I thought, were pretty great. Like, they didn't change anything central to the experience, really, but they, sort of upgraded the visuals a bit, made things a little smoother, fixed the water temple potential lockout in Ocarina of Time, they made it so that it was a better experience than the original without, like, damaging the integrity of, I played Majora's Mask on 3DS, and I did play Majora's Mask, not some weird different version or whatever. Like, it's the real game. It was just a little nicer, had some improvements, and I feel like they could have done that there, but...
Yeah. Well, and I think, too, Nintendo just has, like you also said, like, they just have an issue with this kind of thing. They seem to, like, where, like, PlayStation and Xbox don't really have this issue. Like, I noticed Nintendo will, not just, like, with their old IPs, but even just... Well, I guess Mario... Okay, Mario is an old IP, but what I mean is that, like, take the newest Mario Party game. Like, little things that other consoles will do, like, for quality of life things. The new Mario Party didn't have... when you're trying to play online with people, you can only play... Like, you can't... How do I explain this? You can't have, like, two people on the same console playing... in one game, if I'm describing that right. Like, do you know what I'm talking about?
I think so.
It's like, how do I... Okay. Like, okay, so here's an example. My friends and I, we wanted to play Mario Party online.
Right.
And only one of them can play at a time with me, but we all want to play together. Okay,
yeah. So it's Nintendo's usual online nonsense, like how you can party up in Splatoon, but it won't necessarily put you on the same team when you do. Stuff like that. Right.
Yeah, so it just feels like just kind of more of Nintendo's BS. I love Nintendo, but like, come on, guys. Like,
I love Nintendo's games. As a company, they're kind of awful in a lot of ways, and they're also just bafflingly bad at anything involving the internet.
Right.
So I don't fully know what their deal is, but
hopefully they get better. I don't know.
Someday. I mean, they're better now than they were a decade ago. They're just still behind.
That's true. Right. Yeah. Very true. And even though I am happy to have finally played and beaten 64, and I'm hoping that we'll get a 35th Zelda, because I'd love to play Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask on the Switch, 2 games I still have not played.
Yeah, I'm shocked they still haven't done those, or the HD re-releases of Wind Waker and Twilight Princess from the Wii U.
Yeah,
like, what?
Yes. Well, that's a look. That is a whole topic there. Like, I'm just sad we don't have Virtual Console. And I'll never not be sad about that. Yeah. Because I loved that. But my only struggle with that was, like I said, which I don't know if you can do button mapping on the Switch, but I just find the Switch just a lot more intuitive than some of the controllers.
I'm pretty sure that you can do that on the Switch, like because the Nintendo Online paid membership gives you access to a bunch of NES and Super NES games, and I'm pretty sure you can do button remapping on that. I'm not 100% certain, but there are a lot of, like, quality of life changes, like save states and stuff that you can do to those. I'm honestly just surprised they haven't done an N64 version of that on there yet, but
Oh, that actually, it's funny you just said that, because that was another thing I've heard people say, is that after the 35th is stops going on sale, that they'll unveil the online 64 and have those game, or maybe 64, or maybe I don't know what I heard now, because
Right. I mean,
Sunshine isn't. Yeah,
that would be great, because the 64 also just makes a lot of sense to put some of those classic games available like that. They're easily emulated. They're, you know, old. They're good enough and valuable enough to be of interest, but old enough not to sell a lot in the original. You know, like that's
right.
It makes sense.
Yeah.
Here's hoping.
Yeah, here's definitely hoping, because that would be just wonderful. And actually, did you play any of the Mario games on the Super Nintendo Online, out of curiosity?
I messed around with Super Mario World a little bit because I played that as a kid.
Yeah.
But not a whole lot. I mostly played Super Metroid, and I need to do more of that and finish it.
I was gonna say, when they first like released the games on to the Super Nintendo library, I was like, oh, I'll just play the original Super Mario. Like, I'll just play a few levels. And I ended up, like, again, this is save states, really helping me. I beat it in like 45 minutes. I did not expect that, but here we are. So, like, if anybody's like thinking of revisiting it again, do it, because it's probably going to be a pretty quick experience.
Yeah.
And Lost Levels is on there too, which I was also really excited for, and I beat as well. Took longer, but again, save states are amazing.
Yeah,
so.
They're so helpful.
Yeah, that's definitely how I got past it. But anyway, that brings an end to what we are getting jiggy with in video games. So what's coming up next is we're going to have a conversation with some awesome people talking about the new issue, specifically discussing the game of the issue, that being The Last of Us. And I think we had a pretty good conversation.
Yeah, I'm excited for people to hear it. I think it's great.
Yeah, it was a long conversation. I guess I should have known, but like I didn't expect it to be as long as it ended up being. But it was a good conversation, and I think I think you all will enjoy it. So, without further ado, take a listen to our discussion on The Last of Us.
What if it's true?
Do I need to remind you what is out there?
Once upon a time, I had somebody that I cared about. And in this world, that sort of shit's good for one thing. Getting you killed.
I need something smuggled out of the city.
Just cargo, Joel.
I just want some simple gear, enough to set me on my way.
I reckon it's got something to do with that girl.
It's got everything to do with that little girl.
It can't be any worse than in here. Can it?
We're shitty people, Joel. It's been that way for a long time.
No, we are survivors.
This is our chance.
It is over, Tess!
What are you so afraid of?
You're treading on some mighty thin ice here.
What do we do?
You make every shot count.
You see, I believe everything happens for a reason.
We don't have to do this. You know that, right?
After all we've been through. Everything that I've done. It can't be for nothing.
All right, so why don't we go around the room and real quick start our discussion by introducing ourselves. So, of course, you know me. I'm Danielle, and I'm joined by Sam.
Yep, that's me.
And we have quite a few guests with us today. So I'm Danielle. My pronouns are she, her. Why don't you give us yours as well, Sam?
Yeah, I'm Sam. He, him.
Okay, and then next we will go to David. Hello, David.
I'm David. He, him as well.
We have Travis.
Hello, this is Travis. My pronouns are he, him.
We have Jacqueline.
Hi, I'm Jacqueline Merritt. My pronouns are she, her.
And then we also have Bez.
Hello, I'm Bez. My pronouns are he, they.
Awesome. Well, first of all, thank you everybody for being here tonight. This is going to be a very interesting, special episode because we have so many people on for this discussion, so
we'll
should
play
be a fun
nice,
ride.
promise. It'll be fun.
We'll try.
We'll do our best.
Yeah, so today we're going to be talking about The Last of Us, which was the game that the most recent issue of the magazine focused on, issue number 6. The Last of Us is considered to be, by many, the greatest game of all time, something that we'll, of course, get into in this discussion. It was released in 2013 for the PlayStation 3, and the game was met with wide acclaim for its narrative and action-packed gameplay. This summary comes from Metacritic. 20 years after a pandemic has radically changed known civilization, infected humans run wild and survivors are killing each other for food and weapons, whatever they can get their hands on. Joel, a violent survivor, is hired to smuggle a 14-year-old girl, Ellie, out of an oppressive military quarantine zone, but what starts as a small job soon transforms into a brutal journey across the U.S. And that summary is from Metacritic.
It's the world's most depressing road trip.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah. No lie.
Yeah. And then, of course, we have the DLC, which was released February 14th, 2014, which is very fitting, I think.
Valentine's Day.
Yeah.
I was about to ask why. I completely forgot
never
that was
realized that, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Aww.
Aw, naughty dog.
Nothing like murder to really get you in the mood.
Oh, yeah. you know it. And, yeah, this chapter follows Ellie after Joel's injury at the university in the main game. And this is intercut with the day that she is bitten, so we get to see the intimate details with that. So today we will be discussing mostly The Last of Us, but we also are going to be discussing the DLC, which I should have mentioned is called Left Behind. So we'll get into all that fun stuff. Clearly this game means a lot to all of us in different ways. What was interesting about this issue, it's easily the longest issue Level Stories put out, 72 pages. So everybody had quite a bit to say, which is great. I'm interested to hear everybody's perspective on when you first played this game or watched a playthrough of it and how you feel about it. Because a lot of people call this game the greatest game of all time, and I don't know if that's a commonly held opinion. I mean, it is for the majority, but I'm interested to hear what everybody else has to say. So why don't we start with Jacqueline?
Yeah. Well, I first played it probably about like a year after it initially came out. It didn't get around to the DLC until about a year after that. But yeah, so I first played it not too long after it came out, and as for whether I think it's the greatest game of all time, I don't think it's the greatest game of all time, and I think that if you think that, you haven't played enough games. So
Fair. Very fair. All right, how about you, Travis?
So I played it a couple months after it came out. I work a very weird job in that I work ridiculous hours for about half of the year and then barely at all for the other half of the year. It's very seasonal. So while I was in the midst of my summer craze of working like 18 hours a day, my roommate was playing Last of Us, and he said, "Oh man, this is the greatest game of all time. This is the Citizen Kane of gaming. This is, incredible." And I kept kind of rolling my eyes a little and being like, "Yeah, okay, buddy, whatever." And he said I had to play it. So when my winter break came around and I finally had some time, I sat down, and I was honestly, it was one of those like Avatar level things where it had been so hyped up that I didn't think it could possibly live up to the expectations. So I was ready to hate it. I was ready to be like, this is overblown, but I really loved it and I enjoyed it. I certainly wouldn't use the phrase best game of all time just because I think it's a little reductive, but I do love it. I think it's a really well crafted game, and it's something that I think is held up for a reason.
Nice. What about you, Bez?
Well, hold on a second, I'm going to speak something blasphemous, but I've never owned a PlayStation console of any kind. Oh no. But, so I never played Last of Us, but I watched a playthrough, and the first playthrough I watched was Cryotic's playthrough. He's a pretty controversial figure now, but I watched his playthrough of the game first, and it was like, well, this scene's fine, and I still kind of think that. It's fine. Like, I don't think it's excellent. Like, I think it's very well crafted, but I wouldn't say best game of all time. I kind of agree with Jacqueline that if you think it's the best game, you haven't played enough games, because there's a lot to like for me, but it's also like, I don't feel like it's, I would put it in the gold standard, holy shit, holy crap, this is amazing, blow my mind category. But that's just me.
Cool. What about you, David?
Okay, look. When I first... ugh. All right, this is where I'm like, how do I say this without getting absolutely crucified? I first played it when right around the time it first came out, and thought it was perfectly passable, much like a lot of the other critics at the time who hadn't lost their minds. But when it gets referred to as like one of the best games of all time, like, I think really that moniker comes from this idea that it was so different to what a lot of mainstream, like, regular video game consumers had experienced, and that's really what critics were responding to, I think. And so my experience was this weird, like, double vision of, I could completely understand why people were looking at that game and saying to themselves, oh, this is like fucking revolutionary, like no one's ever done anything like this before, and then also being like, yeah, but the gameplay is kind of dull and like not super creative, and the story's been done to death in other literature. But I think for like a mainstream audience, I completely get why regular like video game consumers were like, holy shit, this thing reinvented the wheel, we've never seen a story like this. It's like I kind of was looking at it through both lenses at the time, and that's sort of still how I look at it, I guess.
Cool. And how about you, Sam?
Well, I actually first played it when it came out as a longtime Naughty Dog fan. Crash Bandicoot 2 was the first game I ever loved, and you know, I really liked the Jack games and Uncharted and all that, so I was excited for this. And actually, it was I don't know if it was the first, but it was one of the first that I played together with my then girlfriend, now spouse and partner, and we played it with the intent of handing off the controller, but she turned out to not particularly enjoy or be very good at the stealth segments, so I ended up playing through most of it myself, and so, you know, it's got some good memories attached to it for sure. I will say that as I was playing it, I was generally enjoying it fine. I definitely agree with sort of the general opinion here that best game of all time is definitely an overstatement. But it's also, like, I don't want to understate the quality of the game either. It's very well put together, very strongly written. It's got some real compelling stuff going on. Like, I wouldn't call it the greatest game of all time, but I would not be at all like it's a game that could easily be a lot of people's favorite game of all time, and that would be completely legitimate. You know, like, I think that it's I mean, I guess any favorite game of all time is legitimate, but you know what I mean. It is a very good game, and I think that that its quality is sort of worth recognizing. I just, also agree that there are a lot of games of similar or greater quality and have been for decades. I think that The Last of Us did what it did very well, and in, I guess, sort of a more accessible manner than, say, a Super Nintendo game or whatever might have been able to do. And I mean, I really, really like it. I guess the ending was really what kind of made it click for me. I enjoyed it the whole time, but it was that, you know, when my, at the time, girlfriend just kind of sat there and were like, whoa, okay, dealing with that whole thing, that it really sort of gained some level of transcendence in my mind. But yeah, no, I do think that it's a little overblown, but so are most things, you know. It is a legitimately good game.
What about you, Danielle?
I agree with like what seems like Sam was saying. This seems to be the common consent here, which is that first I'll say that I played the game actually earlier this year, prior to when everything shut down. So it was around like January, February I first played it. And it's been built up so much over the years as, again, the greatest game of all time, and so I went in with those expectations. And I think, like Sam was saying, I think it's the game is very competent at what it's doing, and I think it definitely should be celebrated for the strides it took in games. Is it the greatest thing of all time? I don't think so. When I finished it, I actually was kind of like, I mean, I don't know. Like, the ending was really good. That's kind of what got me as well. But I just kind of walked away with it like, yeah, I mean, I guess it was fine. It's having played it more that I actually appreciate it more. Ironically, because in the beginning, I kind of hated the gameplay. I struggled with it a lot. But yeah, I still think it's a really good game. I think it deserves all the praise it gets. I just think I just wouldn't call it the greatest of all time. I wouldn't even probably put it in my favorites, but I still think it's a very good game.
It's always kind of weird to talk about games in this space because it's hard to straddle the line between, like, it seems so often like the rhetoric in the gaming world is either like, oh, this is the greatest thing that anyone has ever created in the history of mankind, or that it's like pure and utter garbage. And it can be so weird to straddle the line on beloved games like this, where we want to both acknowledge its quality and its influence and the praise that it has earned, while also, you know, trying to stay clear of the, you know, extreme greatest of all time rhetoric. I know that I personally, at least, definitely don't want to paint the game as not very good, because I do think it's legitimately excellent. It's just, you know, yeah.
Yeah.
And that polarization
and I'll
of opinion...
admit to...
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. I'll admit to guilt on starting it kind of negatively, just because, like, in response to the question, is it the greatest of all time, I have to affirm no, because I don't believe that. But it is a really good game, and I would actually say that it's probably one of my favorite post-apocalyptic stories of all time, even if I don't think the game itself as a whole holds up the way that a lot of people seem to think that it does.
Were you going to say something, Travis?
Yeah, I was just going to say, Sam's comment about the sort of polarization of the gaming community's opinions on games is not only completely accurate, but also kind of prescient when you look at what happened with the sequel to this game and its reception and how people looked at it. Like, it didn't get any better with time. In fact, it got much worse. There was no room for nuance. There was no room to say that, you know, this worked well and this didn't, and I feel like this could have been done better and that kind of thing. And there doesn't seem to be a lot of appetite in at least a lot of mainstream outlets to discuss those type of things. People really do want to say, you know, greatest game of all time or utter trash, as Sam said.
Well, it's interesting, too, because earlier this year, you know, with 2020 happening, everybody was having best of the decade polls. And on Metacritic, this came out as best game, not only of all time, but of the decade. And that was when I was first playing it. So I just, like you said, game journalism kind of seems to talk in extremes a lot of times. And I remember finishing it and being like, not sure I agree with that. But I think that's almost like doing a disservice to the game itself.
Yeah.
But
yeah, it gets more complicated when we're talking about, like, of the decade or of the generation, too. Because, like, I think it would definitely stand a chance as greatest of its, like, gaming generation, you know, like on the PS3, 360. It'd be up there at least. But, you know, that's, again, it's more complicated, and it gets more complicated the more you kind of narrow it down. But
yeah, I was going to say, depends what you just said, like PS3 or Xbox, like, comparing it to a Nintendo game is, like, not really fair, I don't think, for either game. So, yeah. Or when I say Nintendo, like a Mario game, comparing like something like a Super Mario to...
Right, yeah.
Yeah, there's not even any hats in this game, so it's already at a loss. Yeah.
But see, the sequel fixed that. You do get a hat in the sequel, so...
That was what Jacqueline was missing the whole time.
Right? It was the secret ingredient.
This is the hat game.
The one element we needed.
Exactly.
Yeah. The one thing. Oh, damn it.
Otherwise it would have been flawless. Sorry, that was mean. He's a talented dude with a problematic career. Anyway.
Unfortunately, we're not going to get into Druckmann in this conversation, which I'm kind of questioning right now. But anyway. So in this issue of the magazine, I always have a section where it's called Fans Write, and people will send me like paragraphs of what a game means to them. And one fan named Luca Newcomb wrote something what I found very insightful, and so I'm interested to hear all of your opinions on it. He wrote, "In my opinion, the title The Last of Us is not the last of humanity as a species, but the last surviving parts of our individual humanity." And the reason I wanted to bring this up is because for some reason, when I played the game, I never quite thought about the relationship between the game and the title. And I'm wondering not only what you all think of this interpretation, but just in general what you thought of the title and how it relates to the game.
I mean, I'm with you in that I never once thought about the title when playing it, and only really thought about it when I saw like this in the outline for our episode, because like the title just kind of like, I don't know, it just like felt appropriate, and I never thought about it in any detail just because it seemed to work.
To me, at the time, it actually came up sort of in Danielle's article, the idea of like who's the villain in this. And to me, it kind of struck me because when I was playing, I was expecting a big infected villain at the end of it. And it wasn't really till I was in the hospital and I was starting to get the feeling that like, oh, no, that's not where this is going. That's not how this ends. And then you get into the conversation with Marlene and you start shooting your way through the hospital, and it becomes very obvious at that point. And that's where it sort of struck me that it was The Last of Us, and pitting us specifically against the infected, that the infected aren't the real enemy here. And I know that's kind of a tired trope in some post-apocalyptic things, especially like zombie literature and stuff like that. That's the whole point of zombie literature. It's the breakdown of society. It's not about the zombies themselves. But that's still not what I'm used to seeing out of video game storytelling. So I hadn't really looked at it from the lens that this person who wrote in had, of looking at the aspects of humanity. When I played it, it was still very much about pitting the idea of humans as the villains against the, more standard video game fare of a monster as the villain.
Interesting. I mean, the thing that I find fascinating is, and just dragging some research from a previous podcast that we've done across, it was originally going to be called Mankind. And there's some background that comes with that, which I won't get into too much, but interesting pivot to The Last of Us. Is just a bit less of Druckmann's heteronormative perspective, like to start with, just in the title, but also like, which he's done a lot to make up for some of the stuff since. But it's tricky because when you talk about The Last of Us in any close reading of any text, the first thing that any professor, or the first thing that I do when I mark papers any single time, is I tell the student to like start with the title, because everyone forgets it. How does the title relate to the text? How does it inform like the themes and the tone of the piece that you're approaching? What does it tell you about the thing you're about to pick up? Like Crash Bandicoot as a title, which is Crash 2 is another Naughty Dog joint. Like that tells you a lot about the tone of the game. Like Crash and Bandicoot are both two kind of silly, bombastic words. And then, Crash 2 is like the Wrath of Cortex. Like they're bombastic and loud. And The Last of Us is short. It's simple. They're very short. Like they're not, polysyllabic words. Last is a very short kind of definitive ending, which is interesting to me because it relates to the text in so many ways. Like I think this writer, Luca, has that interesting perspective of like we're losing individual parts of our humanity. But if that's the case, then really like this game should be called The Last of Us, and the second one should be called like The Rest of Us or something. Like it's like I just think they just kind of missed a beat, I feel, because it's like that. I mean, you call it, if you have Now You See Me, you call it Now You Don't, right? You don't call it Now You See Me Too. That's all I'm saying. Right? I'm just saying, you call it Now You Don't. Anyway, but yeah, it's a curious title, because if the idea is that Ellie is sort of the last bastion of hope, which is obviously the tropey plot of the game and not the actual story of the game, and in Joel's act of extracting her from being vivisected by the fireflies, the intimation of the title seems to be that us, like the us that it's referring to, is whoever is still alive as Joel makes that decision, because there can no longer be a future of humanity once he makes this decision. And that seems to be who the us is referring to, but then playing like the attribution game of like, oh, but it could be the fireflies because they die out after this, or it could be like there's so many different ways you can interpret. It could be the fact that the last of the quarantine zones falls at the end of this game, and we get to see the remnants of that, and the remnants of that world in the second one. Like, so many attributions you could put us to that I'm probably more interested in what people are taking away from that title rather than what the author actually intended, because I think it's such a broad reading. Yeah.
See, the interpretation that I sort of, because I made a video about The Last of Us on my YouTube channels, just a big old narrative analysis thing, and the sort of interpretation of the title that I reference in there was actually something that I saw referenced in the Errant Signal video on the game. The idea that the game is sort of a process of going through character by character and sort of establishing who us is to them, to any given person. Like, as you know, Frank sort of counting as us to Bill, everyone else being outsiders he has to protect them from. Joel, you know, Ellie is his us, Tess was his us, you know, and everyone else is an enemy, and that sort of relating to both games, really. Their sort of ongoing background theme of, like, violence being one of the main factors in what shapes these characters' lives and how they interact with the world around them, that, like, certain people you consider to be part of your group, and everyone else is sort of inherently seen as someone who might hurt you, and that you have to protect, you know, yourself and your us from them.
Interesting.
And that's sort of the...
Is it criticizing? Is it critiquing those concepts, or just exploring them, do you feel?
I'm not... I would say critiquing, but I also am one of the people who think that what Joel did at the end was wrong, and a lot of people either don't agree with that or are too desperate to justify it to think
Sam,
about it like that.
Sam, I'm curious, are you saying that that's what you feel, or that's what the developers feel?
Oh, I'm not sure exactly what the developers feel. I suppose I haven't read like an interview or something that would confirm that, but I do think that the game is sort of critical of that mindset, even if it's not necessarily, like, explicit about that. But that's just my view on it.
I mean, knowing Druckmann's backgrounds, like, he grew up on the West Banks, like, he was a kid who basically experienced, like, the conflict between Israel and Palestine every day on, like, the ground level. So he's talked about this a little bit. If you want his full life story, Danielle and I last week recorded pretty much a full podcast where I just ran through his entire life and how he became a game dev and all those sort of things. But it's tricky because, yes, the game, when you say that, now it's all clicking for me, Sam. I hadn't actually thought about it like that, which is the whole act of the Israel-Palestine war is different people deciding who counts as people that we want to care about and which land is ours and who should be able to live on it. And when you say the game is like this process of, on the individual level, it's like this, it's reducing the complexity of the socio and geopolitics and all that stuff onto the micro scale and being like, okay, in one-to-one interactions, in the same way The Walking Dead does it, in one-to-one interactions, are you one of us? Like, are you part of the zombie survival group that we've got here? Which makes sense because then the second game takes it to like a societal level and tries to explore it in its next sort of natural evolution. But yeah, that's actually fascinating that it really is this process of like each act of the game is them working through like, okay, do we consider you to be us? And then the final act is obviously asking the question of like, do we consider the Fireflies and their agendas to be one that we want to onboard? That's really interesting, Sam. Yeah,
I think it makes sense of the game structure of having like multiple sort of side stories with other characters who are only really around for their arcs too, you know, but that's also, I mean, you know, that's point being, to bring it back to what the original question was, I suppose, is that I also do actually really like that idea that the reader brought up, that, you know, it's the last of our humanity as opposed to just the last remaining people. I think that is a cool way to look at it, and one that I hadn't thought of before, yeah.
But I think what's interesting about this conversation is that there isn't one answer to this, and that's what I kind of love about the title. Like, I like when we can like have discussions like this, and I think what David said is a good point, that it doesn't necessarily matter what the developers mean by the title, it's what the people take away from it, and I think it's open-ended enough that there's many interpretations, and I think they're all valid in their own way.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of those titles that are like vague enough that they have an idea that they're capturing, but there's enough room for interpretation for you to kind of explore and comb through that idea. I really like Lucas' interpretation of the title, that it's about individual humanity, the parts of what it means to be a human being, because that asks the question, what it means to be a human being. Is that allowed to change? Should it change over time in different environments, or should it stay the same?
Yeah, it's a
I
good
think
point.
that's a really good point.
Yeah, is caving someone's skull in with a lead pipe, like, is that kosherized humanity, or is humanity like trying to be the bigger person and talk it out and potentially, you know, let your loved ones get killed or bitten or whatever?
Yeah, and I don't want to take it too off the rails, but I just want to note that for me personally, before playing this game, the only other Naughty Dog games I had played were all the Uncharted games, and I know they kind of were under fire for the whole thing of, is Nathan Drake a good guy because he's constantly killing all of these people, like in his path, and
disturbing colonial, or not colonial, and disturbing indigenous sites of, you know, worship and things like that.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
But he's fun. It's Tomb Raider, guys. Don't worry about it.
Oh my god. We oh my god, that'd be a whole nother podcast, because I just replayed through the trilogy, and I thought I liked the games. I'm so confused now, but anyway.
As someone who does like them, but also like, yeah, those are problems. Like, yeah, it's complicated.
Yeah, it's complicated, exactly. But what I appreciate about this game, playing it, was that Joel, like, okay, there's the moral gray here, but like largely Joel wasn't really a good guy. He was doing things that were objectively bad, and you knew it as you were playing. And so I appreciated that nuance of gameplay that they were able to achieve, partially because of the subject matter, but also just, yeah, it just felt like it took a bit more depth to it than your typical action game. Admittedly, I don't play that many action games, but in my experience with them. And actually, that kind of goes nicely into our next topic, because for me personally, I think that The Last of Us, while it's doing a lot of unique things, it largely follows the typical tropes for this type of game, for an action game, for, I can't speak to this one, but zombie games, I'm assuming. Can anybody agree with, or say if that's correct?
Sort of.
They tend to be like wave, kind of. They tend to be like wave survival, and like that helps you push through to another area, kind of.
Yeah, they tend to be much more like action-y, and I think the thing too is that zombies have for a long time been cannon fodder in video games because you can gun them down guiltlessly, like robots or Nazis. Like,
right.
They exist in this medium until, you know, like the generation that The Last of Us came out in, primarily as just a thing that you can shoot and have fun with. So I do think that The Last of Us definitely sort of pushed against that trope by using them more as background information and primarily focusing the story on human interaction, which is a pretty normal zombie story trope thing, just not necessarily a normal video game thing until I'd say probably that year between this and Telltale's Walking Dead.
Yeah.
What
I was going to say is I find it really interesting because I know, Danielle, I talked to you about possibly doing an article on this, and unfortunately it never really came to be, but it was the idea that how did we get here with zombie games? Because originally the zombie story was a Haitian myth about slaves being risen from the dead to continue working for their masters even after they had, you know, been laid to rest and allowed to not do that anymore. And how did we get from a story about slaves having to work from beyond the grave to cannon fodder in video games, as Sam had said? So I think it's really funny to see how much that monster and that idea has changed over time, and changed depending on the medium in which it's being told. Like in literature, it's the disfigurement of the human and the self and seeing yourself reflected. In a lot of film and television, it is body horror and things like that. And with video games, it has become the dehumanization, the idea of not human, othering, not us, right? And it's funny how each medium takes something a little different from this story, and how it's, because of that, changed and evolved so many times to be almost completely unrecognizable, kind of like a zombie.
Huh. That got meta at the end.
Nice. You did it. Good job.
Well, okay, so that is interesting then, because I guess I need to play. Well, I still haven't played The Walking Dead, so that will be something on my list soon, hopefully.
Have you not?
Oh man,
I've not played it.
Oh
Season
no!
1 is amazing. So
yeah, seriously.
I might have a spare
So
Steam key for that one if you want it. Actually, I have to look in my folder, but yeah, you definitely should play it. It's very good.
Oh, okay.
Just
Oh,
you know,
man.
prepare yourself. It hurts in the
Yeah.
best
That's
way, but oh man.
Look, Sam and I have talked about this before, but being English majors, we know what hurt feels like. We part of us enjoys it in our
Yeah,
Right.
fiction.
What's that that quote from the Doctor Who episode? Blink, like sad is happy for deep people or something like
Yeah,
that.
which is absolutely something Stephen Moffat would write. What a pretentious
100%.
asshole.
I forget
What a
who said the
fuckwit.
quote. I forget who said the quote, but there's the quote, we don't go to the theater to feel good, we go there to feel. And I feel like that's
Yes.
really shaped how I look at a lot of media ever since I heard that quote. Like,
Yeah, that's a good quote. That's a good quote.
I mean,
That's a very good quote.
that's essentially the job of media crit as a concept in society, is like the ability to try and explain an emotional response to a text with evidence in some way and try to understand like why you felt a feel about a thing, or why in fact more commonly you were unable to feel a feel about a thing. But the Walking Dead, the game, like the Telltale games, are an interesting contrast with this story because they both essentially do the same thing, which is take a bunch of things you've seen before, recontextualize them, and then overlay this mechanic of like, look at you role-playing through this thing, look at you travel through this story, look at you experience change and growth of these characters. The difference with The Walking Dead is you get a few choices, like a few actual choices, and then the rest of it is simulated choice, because simulated choice is how real life works. Like you make decisions in conversation.
Just yes, but I agree. Yes, a lot of
Yeah.
people don't seem to get that, so I was just excited to hear you say that.
People criticize it. They do. They criticize it for that. I'm like, nah, fam, that's how you talk to people, though. It's not every decision you make gets someone killed, but like whether or not you say something that comes off as flippant or rude or funny, like that's the work of conversation. I think they perfectly capture that. Weirdly, and I'm gonna praise a game that everyone hates. I think the Batman Telltale games do a much better job of that, where the nuance of the conversations is so much more, like there's so much more nuance in them because not everything is life or death in that story. But in contrast to The Last of Us, where it is just this like kind of, you can see Druckmann's, or you can see the Naughty Dog house style bumping up against Druckmann's intentions with making it this grounded, gritty action game. But it is full of these tropes of like, okay, get the gun, shoot the baddies, get the melee weapon, do the melee thing, do some stealth, strangle the guy from behind. Like none of that's particularly unique. It's just the animations are different. There's a level of viscerality and brutalism that I think a lot of people found quite shocking at the time. To what extent some of that stuff is used to erase blackness and queerness, we can maybe get into later. I don't know if it's on Danielle's doc, or that can be a discussion for another day. But yeah, it is interesting to me that in contrast with the Walking Dead games, this game gives you no pretension of choice. It's like you're just following Joel's story. Papa Joel is making all the choices. We just get to sit back and enjoy. And yet some of the tropes are still pretty enjoyable. I don't know. It's weird. I still like the moment to moment a lot of the time.
Yeah, to your point about it, I think that the extent to which this game is very tropey largely comes in the fact that it is overall a very traditionally gamey game. Like, I guess just to keep contrasting with The Walking Dead, like that sort of cinematic adventure game format, at that point had really only been pioneered by Quantic Dream games, which that's a whole can of worms, but, that it was not a very common or established way of telling making video games or telling stories in them. The Last of Us is very much go through some gameplay, watch a cutscene, listen to some people talk. It's presented in a very normally gamey manner, which has been the subject of a lot of criticism, which I find which is complicated to me, because on one hand I think that we should try and develop the medium past that, but on the other hand I don't think that that's like an illegitimate format to tell a story in or anything. But that's point being, it is presented extremely well, but nonetheless fairly typically for a video game, and I think that's probably where the sort of typical tropey element of its presentation mostly comes from.
I think
But
it's
that
also
seems to be a retrospect. You go.
I was gonna say, well, I was gonna say something pretty similar. I think it's interesting to look at that with the benefit of hindsight, looking at it 7 years later, because I still feel like there's little moments in there where they were trying things that were a little bit different, like the fact that you pull the trigger to kill the doctor, and it's not even like a reaction prompt. It is Naughty Dog has left you in control of that character, and yet not in control of the plot, if that makes sense. Because Joel still can stand there, but that's all he can do until he shoots the doctor. You can look and try to fire a warning shot. You can look for a melee weapon. You can, there's a lot of different things that I was trying to do in that moment and was unable to do because that was not what the developers intended for that moment, and really probably isn't what Joel would have done either.
Exactly. That I think is kind of the main takeaway from that, really.
Yeah, exactly.
That's an interesting moment. That's an interesting moment to me to bring up, just because when I first played it, if I'm recalling correctly, I just went ahead and shot the doctor. There was no hesitation on my part because I was so thoroughly invested in that mindset of Joel and playing as him as the character. And then I definitely know that on my most recent playthrough, I didn't hesitate to shoot him either, just because the game is for all the issues I have with its gameplay, it's very good at getting you into the headspace of Joel and making you think in the ways that he would.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I was gonna say too, I didn't hesitate either, and it's almost like that feeling when you're playing a game and you make a choice like that, then you talk to somebody else and they're like, I think you wrote about this, Travis, in one of your articles where you were like, I was trying to shoo him away, do anything, but not shoot him. And I'm like, oh, I just shot him. I feel bad now.
Danielle's like, and I'd do it again.
Yeah, it's really, that's their games now, and that's something that I think The Last of Us deserves more credit for, actually, than what's usually given, is that a lot of games now are trying to sort of test our ability to pay attention outside of what we just expect we're supposed to be doing in a game. That was Spec Ops: The Line's entire thing.
Yes,
was just
thank you.
Hey, you're not it was a major BioShock thing too, but yeah, Spec Ops just made the whole thing hey, you just followed orders even though it was kind of fucked up. Why did you do that? And I think that The Last of Us engages with that in an interesting way that's a little too it's very linear, which isn't bad, but I think can make it a little more difficult for people to catch on to. But yeah, that's the thing. It plays with the tropey presentation that it does have in ways that I think are often a little too subtle to be easily noticed just by the casual observer, but I think are absolutely there and strengthen the experience significantly for it.
Definitely. Yeah, building off that thought, I want to get to talking a bit about I know Danielle's got it on her doc, but the escort side of things where it's the Guardian genre. But the other thing that's interesting to me is this game in a different context, a lot of it is walking from point A to point B and listening to a conversation, which is the majority of Rockstar's in-house narrative style, which is get on your horse and ride from point A to point B and listen to an interesting conversation between two people. That's and then get a cutscene, do some shooting, and then do the same thing on the way back. That's their formula. The difference here is that there's no going back. You're just kind of traversing in a linear fashion. But in the same way that Rockstar gets dinged a lot for that being an uninventive way to tell narrative now that they've been doing it for X number of years, for some reason Naughty Dog and I think particularly Sony's now first person in-house style God of War, all of these kinds of things, that's what they do as well. It's still walking and talking and then action segments in the middle. It's just the presentation and the writing is such quality that it's harder to criticize it it's harder to criticize the medium or the vehicle by which they choose to tell these stories than it is to then criticize the other aspects. So when it's okay, if we're talking about that moment that we were just discussing about before, where Joel cuts his way through the fireflies and comes upon the doctor and he has the gun, the question of why most players wouldn't hesitate to pull the gun is that you've been playing as a fucking cowboy for 20 hours who can kill anything in his fucking path, right? Yeah. And what he's doing is and the gun is obviously the tool of the cowboy. It's the way in which you control and saddle. It's the way in which you can overcome the indigenous population in this case, whether it be the zombies or whether it be the insurrectionists, the fireflies, who a lot of people have argued might represent some kind of like coded, at least as the indigenous people. I think Druckmann probably did do that a little bit on purpose. It's no coincidence that the leader of their faction is not a white man. But that you pull the trigger so easily and so greedily. Like, I remember feeling like greedy about it. I was like, yeah, fucking do it. That's the game has like been, it like funnels you into that mode of like, I am the dominant force. Like, I am the individualist. I am like the fucking cowboy. This is the West again. I think the second game takes that to its extremes, but yeah, it's interesting thinking about that. And there's a great piece I'd encourage anyone to read on Bullet Points Monthly by Yusuf Cole about the ways in which the gun becomes, like the firearm becomes this vehicle by which The Last of Us as a universe kind of determines who has power and who doesn't. And this idea that if you have a gun, you're dangerous and you should be respected. That's definitely a thing that came from the West. And yeah, it's just like a fascinating, like, you know, the West can't exist without a gun. Like, that's, we can't imagine a cowboy without a pistol and a cool hat. But this game takes those tropes and hats again. I'm just really hat focused today. I don't know what's going on, guys. But
it's just what's off the top of your head.
Oh
my god.
The podcast is cancelled. We've done it. We finished. Wrap it up, Danielle. It's over.
We're gonna have to shut this down.
Yeah. Fucking hell. You know who doesn't wear a hat is Ellie, who you protect in this game. So that was a segue from that awful joke. But
you tried.
I want to throw a question out to the floor, which is that this game has been described by Druckmann as in the Guardian genre. And so to his credit, which is not something I'll say very often about the man, he is well read and he can talk the talk when it comes to literary discourse. And he describes this game as being, the first one at least, as being in the escort, rather than being like an escort mission, quote unquote, like you'd imagine in a Ubisoft game or something like that. He describes it as being in the Guardian genre, and he talks about studying a lot of Guardian genre literature before, as they were working on the script, I suppose. Does that resonate with you guys? This idea of it being in like this, of it being it's like kind of its own genre, like that Guardian type?
I definitely think it does. I mean, like, it and The Walking Dead Season 1 get a lot of flack for being about sad dads protecting, you know, like representations of their lost innocence. But, like, to me, there's a reason that, like, they started this massive trend of other games exploring those concepts, because they did such a good job at, like, really getting you into, like, the character's head and making you feel for all the characters in the world. Like, you feel for Ellie. She doesn't feel like a burden in any sense of the word, because she's, like, self-reliant and she protects herself, and, you know, she has a drive to survive, unlike, I don't know, Ashley from Resident Evil 4 or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, when I just think about it simply, I could think of a lot of other things that belong in that genre. Even other games, like Ico is kind of what first comes to mind for me. But yeah, I mean, that makes sense. There's a lot of other stuff like it out there, and the game certainly bears more resemblance to those types of stories than to your stereotypical video game escort missions, so, yeah.
Well, that's why I loved, Travis actually wrote a piece about this for the issue, and I absolutely loved it, because it was like a deep dive into the escort mission and why in video games we tend to get frustrated with it. And I don't know if you want to speak to this, Travis, but like just how effortlessly The Last of Us makes the escort mission make sense to the game, like in all factions.
Yeah, so, I mean, there's a lot to be said. Like, there is definitely the Guardian genre, and one of the things that I really didn't even get to talk much about in the article was the idea of, I think, why the sad dad and dadification of games has become a thing over the past decade or so, and it's become so popular, is because it's catering always to that presumed cis-straight male white player, and it is kind of the only way in which men are allowed to show and experience emotion is caring for a child, their child specifically. That is really the only acceptable way, because they are still the strong protector man. And that's the only way that they're allowed to deal with emotion. If it's for another woman, or God forbid, any other gender, that's just not allowed, and you can't experience that kind of level of emotionality. And if you're looking at it from just a video game perspective, historically, escort missions have been pretty sexist. It's usually been an older, stronger male protecting a younger, weaker female. I talk about Princess Rudo. I talk about Ashley from Resident Evil. The fact that sadly the most capable female sidekick that you get in a game up until that point, as far as I'm concerned, is Minnie Mouse in Kingdom Hearts 2. Because she can wreck shit when she wants to. It's really the only time.
Well, you've also got Mulan.
Hashtag representation.
That's fucking funny.
And
what did you say, Jacqueline?
You've also got Mulan in Kingdom Hearts 2.
But even then, she's taking on the role of a man, right? Even then, she's taking on the role of a man. She is a strong, capable...
Only at first.
Yes, true. But even still, it's not framed as an escort mission.
That too.
Yeah. It's not framed as an escort mission at that point. She is a party member who is working with you as a team member. We're talking Donald and Goofy here, so useful is not the term I would use, but they're there. And whereas Minnie has a separate health bar that you will fail the mission if Minnie takes too much damage, as opposed to Mulan just being unconscious and you needing a potion to revive her. Or Phoenix Down, or I don't even remember. That's Kingdom Hearts, whatever. The whole point is, that's not how they presented it in The Last of Us. Ellie is very slowly introduced to you. The first time you have to go on one of those walk and talks that you've mentioned. The worst is that a Jeep drives by on the street and you aren't near it. That's the level of threat that you deal with. And then when you have to go out and face the infected, her and Tess are separated from you, so you still don't need to worry about her. She's not a burden to you. She is not an annoyance. She's just there. And as you get more progressing through the story, when you get separated, Ellie is not with you. Ellie is with Tess. So you have to make your way through that history museum on your own. So you have a lot of time to get accustomed to her before you have to start worrying about her. The timing on her, I got attacked, you need to free me kind of things, is very generous. And she becomes an ally to you in combat. She doesn't give away your stealth position. She can throw you ammo. She can stab someone who's on top of you. She can give call outs as to enemy locations. It's not the typical escort mission because it is not the big strong man protecting. It is a teammate who ends up being an ally to you in battle.
How do you feel about that in contrast to something like, say, BioShock Infinite, where because that's a fucking tapestry to unpick of, boy, there's a lot going on there. But well, I should not have brought that up. Now my brain is just unspooling. Fuck me. But,
oh no.
Because that's complicated on so many more levels. But the thing I was alluding to there directly is this idea that, and to their credit, Sony and now they're kind of in-house narrative style, they've started to branch out a bit. You've got God of War where you've got Atreus who is sort of trailing after you, who also can't really be killed. It seems like taking away these health bars in some way has changed the equation, but then the impetus is not on you as the Guardian to physically protect them, even though that is the act of doing the combat. It's in fact the emotional care or that you're sort of mentoring this person through this awful world. And to what extent I find the idea of... I alluded to this in my article, but the idea of Ellie's purpose in the story being... Her kind of role is to draw Joel back into the world and to give him something to care about again, and him to become the father that he was. And isn't it great that he's got something to give a shit about again? But it's problematic that both of the women that he relates to the most in the story both do that. There doesn't seem to be room in Joel's life for another type of woman who isn't responsible for his emotional well-being.
I would disagree. Say what you're going to say about Tess. No, say what you're going to say about Tess.
Oh, I was just going to say, because Tess to an extent is kind of his gruff older caretaker, where she's just do the fucking job I tell you and you'll get paid. She's kind of keeping him moving, going through the motions, waiting for him to return to the world. Was sort of my reading of her character.
Oh, that's so interesting, because I had such a completely different read on Tess. Especially, I think the one line that really clinches it for me is where she's revealing that she's been bitten, and she says, you know, there has to be enough here that you feel some sort of obligation to me, so you get her to Tommy's. And I talked about this on my podcast where we talked about Last of Us, but to me it says that they both have feelings for each other, that they know the other person has had feelings for each other, but they've never spoken about it, and they always thought they'd have more time, and now they don't. And I feel like it probably took years and years to get to that point. And he saw probably Tess as a unique outlier as opposed to representative of humanity in the same way that Ellie was, if that makes sense. Yeah. Like that was his relationship to Tess as opposed to his relationship to humanity, in the way that Ellie is sort of symbolic and emblematic of that.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, is the reading then at the end that Joel, in fact, is able to see Ellie as the unique human she is rather than representation at the end? That's why he saves her. Do you know? Because
that's a whole other can of worms.
Yeah. It's like, yeah, but it's like, because that's where I'm like, that's where like I think your reading makes sense. I completely agree with it. It's just it's the way the game then handles that stuff in actual execution that just, yeah, it, even though Bioshock Infinite does a lot of stuff that's very complicated narratively with time travel and dimension jumping and all kinds of nonsense. One thing it does really well is it knows exactly what it's going for. And it's like, okay, 3, 2, 1, this is the themes of the story. We paying attention. They're right in front of you. Hey, paying attention? Listen, here it is again. And the whole game is like repeatedly reminding you again and again. And it's like, hey, you know what this is about yet? And you're like, yeah, Jesus, I get it. It's fine. I get it. It's about choices.
I mean, it's a good game to write a paper about for an intro to philosophy class.
Absolutely. Be so good. Yeah, exactly. It's like philosophy 101. Whereas I think The Last of Us, like, it lacks a precision that that Left Behind definitely has. But as a story, the game as a whole like lacks a level of precision where it gives us the freedom to have these discussions about the readings. And to what extent you want to credit the storytellers in the game itself for creating that space for discussion, or criticize them for not being as precise as maybe they could have been, it's hard to say, because games are big and unwieldy and there's so many pieces in them, and it's hard to it's hard to say who did what and to what extent. It's like, okay, the marketing team told us to change that name or what have you. But it seems to me that like the fact that reading makes sense until you then think about the ending, and it's like, fuck. Because even my reading, I'm like, I think about the ending and I'm like, that doesn't make sense either. Like there's so much incongruity with the themes and the execution of the story that I think that's why it's so interesting to talk about this stuff. Because even on the idea of like, well, you're protecting her, but what's her actual role emotionally in the story? Is it to keep Joel alive long enough to get to the end to come back to the world, or is her role like, or does she have her own agency, or is Joel just doing Tess's bidding until he's not doing her bidding at the end? Like there's so many layers to that, and they all just like come up with more questions.
Yeah, and I do agree with you. You're 100% right on every aspect of that, but it's just on a personal preference level, I would prefer the imprecise nuance of Last of Us to the black female revolutionary was also one of the bad guys of Bioshock Infinite.
There's bad guys on every side, we promise.
Right.
Oh, fuck, I forgot about that. Yeah.
Yeah, so
then it's an issue of taste. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, so I mean, you're not wrong on any level, but I would rather the gray where there's room to talk about it rather than the very loud and proud, questionable choices. So
yeah, that's fair.
Well, I'm wondering, so I was going to switch to talking about the pandemic, but honestly, we're talking about characters now. So why don't we just continue with that? And let's just stick, since we're basically talking about the ending. Let's just talk about the ending. We're going to talk about Joel now.
Sorry.
And basically the ending is not just obviously it's Joel's final choice, but it's also the little epilogue section where we have this section where Joel then lies to Ellie, and we get that just wonderful cutscene. So it tends to be a bit polarizing, this choice, apparently, with people.
Really?
splits.
No.
I know.
Apparently in this room we're ready to pull the fucking trigger though.
Damn.
I mean, yeah, I've heard a lot of debate as to like sort of what it means, what's going on there or whatever, but I don't think I know anyone who didn't like that ending in particular.
That's true.
I mean, I'm sure that some people do because it's not very satisfying at all. Like the
I
epilogue,
can definitely
see.
You mean?
I mean, if you're a fandom obsessed fan fiction type, I don't imagine that you care for that ending at all.
Right? Yeah.
Just to clarify, like we're talking about like the epilogue and the ambiguity, right? Or the murders.
I'm assuming the epilogue.
Yeah,
I think mostly that, but I feel like all of it is subject to this to one degree or another.
See, that's interesting because I fucking hate the ambiguous ending. I think it's lazy and shitty. Yeah.
Well, never mind. I was wrong.
Interesting.
I'm gonna.
But also, what?
I'll paint myself into a corner and explain myself out later, but just want to front load that. It's more on a craft level and personally I enjoyed it, but craft wise I'm like, wow, yikes, guys. Anyway, sorry, Danielle.
Yeah, I'm kind of like 50-50 on it myself. Like, I kind of split.
Yeah, glad it's not just me.
Yeah, I don't know. Those types of endings, this one included, do tend to... My initial reaction to them tends to be, if not negative at the very least, kind of... Oh man, I don't know. I'm like a story and themes guy. Like, I like to be able to finish a story and be like, yes, this was about that, and it said it by doing this and that, like just everything sort of clear and I appreciate when that happens. But, so sometimes it takes me a little warming up to something like this. But man, that moment was such a... I think there's something about the way that I had very strong feelings that what Joel had done there and that what I was forced to act out with him was wrong. And then I wanted it to somehow come to some kind of real conclusion, and the fact that it just let it sit, that it was about his unwillingness to fess up to Ellie and how that might in the future affect their relationship or whatever, that I wasn't sure how I felt about it at first, but it left a way bigger impact on me than, if he'd just been like, yeah, no, I did this, and she was mad at him or something. Like, I don't know, I get chills in that ending, honestly. I like it a lot.
Yeah, I have to agree with you just because, I mean, I think ambiguity, it can be a blessing or a curse. Sometimes it's not the best choice and it's kind of just like an excuse to get out of properly ending something. But I don't really think that was the case with this. I think the ambiguity is the point. Like, their relationship is flawed. We don't know what's going to happen. I think had this game ended, and I somewhat wrote about this in the magazine, but how... if it had ended sort of a little, like tying it up in a bow, where they're going to this community to live with Tommy, and there's hope, and things are going to be better, and Joel was honest with Ellie, I don't know if that ending would be as true to what the game has been setting up, than if, then having this ambiguity and sort of not knowing, because that's just this universe. It kind of, it sets that up for us. And I like being able to speculate what could possibly happen, which is somewhat why I didn't want a sequel, but we'll get into that. But yeah, so I like the ambiguity, but I'm willing to admit that that's a personal preference thing, but I still like it.
I'm also personally a big fan of the ambiguity, though I don't feel that it's as ambiguous as a lot of people might claim. Like, it leaves the question open of, like, how could this possibly affect Joel and Ellie's relationship in the future? But, like, it leaves that question open because, like, we kind of know the answer. Like, there's no good ending to his lie there. There's no possible way that, like, that lie will stay hidden forever, that, like, the truth won't come out. And Ellie saying okay there, to me, just, like, speaks to her just kind of... Like, I feel like it's pretty clear that she's acknowledging that she's not getting the full truth, but just kind of, like, accepting it because she doesn't have anywhere else to go, and no one else who will care about her or stay by her the way Joel did.
I think it's to what Danielle had said earlier about the kind of the lazy cop out, oh well it could have been anything endings, like almost like was it a dream kind of things. Like even with Inception I was a little but
I was about to bring that up.
Yeah,
but look at like
that's
Inception. Look at like The Sopranos, for instance, though. Like, I don't know if I'm spoiling The Sopranos for anyone here, but like it's been a few years. I feel like I'm allowed to. It ends with, you know, Tony wondering if he's about to get offed, and then a door opens, and that's it. And when the ambiguity plays that well into what the characters are thinking, I feel like it does serve well. Like, so Tony is going to have to live the rest of his life wondering if every time a door opens, someone's about to kill him. Someone's about to just pull a gun, and he's going to have to live with that for the rest of his life. And that's how we end the series, because that's just what he's accepted. That's what his future will be from now until, you know, until it eventually happens. And I feel like it's important for Ellie as well and for Joel because of the ambiguity that they feel. Joel is not sure whether Ellie believes him. Ellie is not sure whether she believes him. And that's why I feel like it works as an ending. It doesn't feel like a cop-out to me because it's so important for us to empathetically feel what they're feeling in that moment. And that's why I feel like it does work. Although it could have so easily been a lazy cop-out, to me anyways.
No, that's totally fair. I wouldn't necessarily call it a cop-out. I just think the execution isn't there to justify the way that they approached it. And let me start by talking about Inception quickly, because you brought that up. So Inception's like a really good example of an ambiguous ending that, similar to The Sopranos, like if your concern is like whether or not he's in a dream at the end, you probably like missed the point of the text. Because the point of that ending is that Cobb, in that story, the work of his character and his arc is to work through his grief to accept the reality he's in. And the reality he's in is one in which his wife is no longer with him. That is like the actual work of the text. And to what extent he's in a dream at the end actually doesn't matter. What really matters is that he's finally let that grief go and he's able to accept what's in front of him, in this case, his children. And the children are a stand-in in that way for reality, if you will. Regardless of whether or not that is true reality, it's the reality that he's choosing to accept, finally choosing to accept one in which his wife is no longer with him. And if you've ever gone through grief and you've been through that process of trying to grapple with the fact that someone is no longer there for you, of course you would do anything to live in a reality where, or rather, you would do anything to not live in a reality where they no longer exist. Whether it's, in Cobb's case, these dreams, whether it's in real life, substance abuse or all kinds of different ways that you can avoid feeling those feelings, it's definitely like the case that story for me has like a clear thematic outcome. And it's like Cobb does achieve that, regardless of whether or not the top topples. With The Last of Us, it gets more complicated because in that same way, the thematic ending or the arc for Joel is realizing that, and this is kind of what we were alluding to before, where it's really hard to say, is him killing the people in the hospital and saving Ellie's life, is that him reclaiming his quote-unquote humanity at a great cost? Is that him finally realizing that she's an individual that he cares about rather than a representation of salvation? Is it him is it him finally separating her from Tessa's dying wish? Is it him, like I kind of discussed this potential in my article, but is it him like finally realizing the Fireflies are just a bit shit at their jobs and they're probably going to kill her anyway? Like there are so many motivations that could possibly go into Joel's actions that the text itself struggles to address and make. It doesn't need to make them clear before that ending, before the epilogue rather, but we need some sense of I'm guessing most people played this game and they're like, the reason he saved her is because he cares about her more than he cares about like saving humanity. That is like the underlying assumption of this text, I guess. But the text doesn't even support that, because then he goes back and builds up this community where he's like, it's fine, we'll do it my way. Which I guess then the reading is like, I don't want to do it their way, I'll do it my way, which is interesting from a textual perspective because he is the gunslinger cowboy, the individualist. So he's like, well, I can colonize the West, I don't need their help. But yeah, I don't know. It's the reason I find it disappointing given the rest of the text is there's a level of nuance leveled throughout the rest of the text that says to me, okay, Joel's going through these conflicting motivations. He's really struggling with whether or not to invest and care in this girl, so much so if he loses her, it's going to damage him. And he has to essentially, at some point in the story, he has to give himself over to caring and admit, like, I might get hurt by this, in the same way that Cobb has to return to reality in the potential that he could be hurt by the fact that this is a dream. My issue is, like, it's really clear in the text of Inception why he's doing it, because the whole story is about that. The whole story is about, from fucking jump, when you get that first scene where he's conducting Inception on Saito, from that first scene, you get Miles' inclusion as this interlocutor in his reality, as this kind of anachronism that is keeping him from returning back to his life. The problem is the text of The Last of Us ends up being about so much more other things than about that particular theme in this case, which is like Joel kind of returning and being brave enough to care again. So when you get the ambiguous ending, I think the ambiguous ending works because it does challenge a lot of your assumptions around, like, exactly what you were saying before, Travis, the idea that, shit, this is not going to end well for anyone. Like, he's really fucked a pooch on this one by lying in this moment. But the motivation of the action means that, or the lack of clear motivation of Joel's actions in going into that hospital seems cool and interesting when it's happening. But the more you think about it and the more you replay it, it's like, okay, but it is sort of crucial to know why he did this, to understand why that lie is so important. We know why it's important for Ellie, but to what extent and why it's important for Joel is something that they fuck up so badly that the second text is still about that and is so much worse for it. Like, it's just this confused mess of, like, well, what did he even stand for? And as a video game, that's like a cool, like, question of philosophy and morals. But in execution, it means that it's hard to bed down these themes in something meaningful. And that's really where I land on this, is like, if it had been a little bit clearer and the text had kind of picked a theme to just, like, bed down in and be like, okay, this is the thing we're exploring, everything articulates off this spine. It tries to do that several times. You get the father character and his son who gets bitten, all these things. It tries to articulate these ideas of parenthood and care, but then also muddles itself with so much of the geopolitics of the Fireflies, and then the practicality of a cure, and then the pandemic and all of these things, that even though those are good set dressings and really interesting ways to create an interesting story, it seems to me that when I walk away from it, what I'm left with instead is the gut wrench of that lie, which is what we should be walking away with, but no real clear understanding of why that lie had to be told, or why Joel had to do that action. And that lack of intrinsic motivation in our fucking protagonist is where I find the craft of this lets itself down a little bit. It's almost like they stumbled at the last hurdle because they didn't want to sort of lock off any one individual reading and say to any one audience member, oh, well, we kind of had this in mind the whole time because you've spent 30 hours with Ellie. And if you've done that, you risk the potential of people not liking the ending. And most people fucking loved it. And they gave enough freedom before the hospital to Joel's interpretations to never have to commit to one thing one way or the other. So that's why I say it feels safe and kind of lazy was the wrong word. It's deliberately safe. It's avoiding the possibility that you might polarize an audience who otherwise would have loved it by telling them or implying Joel's motivation too strongly, because then it lets them, it stops you imprinting your own motivation onto him too heavily. And so that's it's kind of where I land on it, where it's not the ambiguous ending itself, it's the framing under which that is delivered to us that feels like not a cop out, but it's sort of a letdown to me. This has been my TED Talk. Thank you.
I mean, I feel like it's certainly interesting to look at it that way, because I look at the sequel and I know that's a completely different game. It could have had different people involved. It had a different narrative lead with it. They should not be seen as the same thing, except that they decided to call it Part 2. So, like, they're trying to treat this as one complete story. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I don't really see them trying to play it safe looking at the sequel. I think there's a lot to be said, good and bad, about that sequel, but safe is not the word I would use. They killed off a beloved character. They switched perspectives. They really made you question everything about that series. Again, to whether it's executed well or not, whether it was a good idea or not, I don't see that as safe. So I can see, having only played the one game and looking at it in isolation, why that's definitely a totally valid read to look at it. Having seen the sequel, I don't think that was their intention. Whether that's what actually happened, I don't know. But I don't think that's what they were intending with that ending.
And I'll personally just say, like, looking at the game in, like, looking at the first game in isolation, I think I see where you're coming from, but I don't agree with that interpretation at all. Because, like, I think if we're actually going to go back to, like, our discussion about the title and what it means, like, if we're looking at it from a perspective of examining who is us for each character, then that's, like, Joel's motivation through and through. Like, we see from the very beginning of the game that he does not care in the slightest about the geopolitics of the world, and the majority of the characters, like, around him that we're, like, shown and get to care about, they don't care either. Like, you know, Fedra and its dystopian state exist, but it doesn't matter to the story of The Last of Us 1. What matters is Joel's personal journey as a character and his difficulty, like, both accepting new people into his life to care about, and also the difficulty of potentially having to give that up and get hurt.
I think personally, I'm sorry, I don't want to, like, dogpile on you for not liking the ending or whatever, but I
like the ending. It's just I have issues.
Well,
with
right,
the
yeah, sorry,
text.
Yeah. I feel like on one hand, generally speaking, ambiguous endings aren't something I would consider safe. I see what you're saying about sort of refusing to take a side, but I don't know. Generally, I feel like people, like, the Sopranos ending was brought up, and, like, that was extremely controversial, if I remember correctly. A lot of people were not satisfied with that at all. But the thing for me is that I feel like there's a degree to which this game in particular, which plays with perspective a lot and very sort of intentionally mingles the player's motivations and feelings with Joel's motivations and feelings, only to wrench that mingling, like, apart at the end by basically saying, yeah, whatever you feel, whatever you want to do here, this is his story and he's going to do what he's going to do, and you just have to do it because that's his choice. I feel like there's a degree to which not picking a side on that is intentional to that end. That, like, the idea here is essentially to get the player emotionally invested and then to sort of rip them out of the comfort of knowing that they are doing a good and just thing by ripping them out of the perspective of the protagonist and not clarifying what that perspective is. So that you're just, at the end, kind of left not only questioning Joel's motivations, but also your own feelings on it. And I would like to think that the just significant amount of discourse and disagreement over, like, whether he did the right thing, which is kind of like you were talking about with, I forget who was talking about Inception, but kind of like that discussion beside the point, but nonetheless part of it. You know, there's so much debate about all of this, and I feel like that sort of speaks to how well that worked, that so many people were left at the end essentially not knowing what to do with Joel, but more importantly not knowing what to do with themselves as a result of it, because the game refused to tell them what they should do with it.
Yeah, because it's not... typically, in what I find in games and what I think sort of makes The Last of Us stand out is that games usually have, like... Again, going back to Uncharted, you have Nathan Drake. He's a treasure hunter. He is going on explorations. He fights the bad guys. He saves the day. That is the definitive ending. He saved the day, and there's no question about that. And what I like about something like this is that it kind of takes it and says, like, it's not going to do that for you. It's leaving it up to you very purposefully, and in a way I do think that is somewhat daring, just because I think I know tons of people who get upset when an ending doesn't sort of have a definitive ending, if you will. Is like, I like the ambiguity of it, and a lot of people don't like it. So in that regard, I think I don't know where I fall with it. I don't know if I wouldn't say it was like a brave ending necessarily, but I wouldn't say it was like a cautious ending either. Like, I think they knew what they were doing, and I think it worked to their advantage.
I agree with that. Yes, they definitely knew what they were doing, and it definitely worked to their advantage.
We've been talking a lot, and I want to try to get, like, touch on the articles as well. So, but I don't know if I want to continue talking about Joel too much longer. But I do want to point out that Sam and David both have excellent pieces in the issue, kind of not necessarily talking about what we were just talking about, more talking about Joel's decisions. I'm not sure if we want to get into that now, because that could be like a long conversation, and we probably want to get to Ellie. But I would encourage everybody to read their articles, because they're both very, very good, and just both different perspectives on that. But let's quickly switch to Ellie now, because we haven't talked much about her now, have we? And I guess we could also talk about Left Behind now as well. So in the upcoming mini issue of the magazine, the mini mag, on Left Behind, Jacqueline wrote a really good article, and she was talking about Ellie's queerness and how it shapes her character. And I wonder, Jacqueline, if you'd mind just talking about that briefly.
Yeah, so basically the thesis of the article is that Ellie's queerness relates pretty strongly to a lot of other aspects of her character, namely her independence, like her independent spirit and her self-sufficiency, and also how it kind of relates to her specialness within the narrative, because like she's the only infected, and that sets her apart from the world and makes it difficult for her to connect to and trust others, which is something that her queerness itself already does to her. And just kind of exploring the way that those things all intersect in the narrative.
I think that's such an interesting reading, and I think it's like so true to Ellie's character, especially because thinking about what she says in the main game when she's talking to Sam, and she says to him, like he says, "Oh, you're not afraid of anything," and she's like, "Well, that's not true." She's like, "I'm afraid of being alone." Or ending up alone, I think she says. I forget her exact wording. And
very relatable, that is.
Yeah, like it's very telling. And obviously, I mean, and this is maybe something we could talk about, the fact that Naughty Dog doesn't include this part of the DLC in the main game, but it's very telling once you know about Ellie's sexuality, because I imagine, like, for a lot of queer people, that's something that you'd feel like this almost feeling of like ending up alone, because nobody would accept you, and especially with how it relates to her bite, and how it's sort of like she has to cover that up. She has to sort of cover up a part of herself, and I love how they set that up beforehand, kind of so they wouldn't get the true gamers angry that we had sort of SJW stuff in our games.
Well, it's fun. To that point, like I really appreciate Jacqueline talking about that, because you said that the queerness is directly relevant to her character, and I think it's really important that queer people be allowed to tell their own stories, because so many straight people just write a straight character who happens to be interested in another man, or happens to be trans, or whatever, all these things. But that's not how it works. Like, our queerness informs who we are, how we live our lives. It has shaped part of us. Is it everything about us? No, absolutely not. We're multi-layered, faceted human beings, but it is certainly a factor. And it is so frustrating to see straight people write queer people that way, because that's not how it works. And it's so nice to see other queer people sort of echoing that sentiment. So thank you for phrasing it like that, because I feel seen, and that's really nice. So thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, I mean, as far as it being integral to her character, like, I can't speak to whether I like fully realized this or not back when I first played the game, because for one, I obviously didn't play the DLC until later, and for two, I was not out yet as trans, so my ability to interpret whether or not girls were gay was like at its lowest level. So like reading Ellie at that time, it's completely clueless. But like when I replayed it recently, like it really clicked to me just how like everything about her really does make her feel like an outsider to the rest of this world. And that's obviously explored much more thoroughly in the Left Behind DLC, where we see that, like, I mean, there's like this one line in her conversation with what's her name?
Riley.
What's the name of the...
Riley?
Riley, right. Okay, in her there's a line in her conversation with Riley when Riley is like checking up on all of like her friends from the military school back when she attended, and Ellie has to point out that those aren't her friends, they're just Riley's friends, and she doesn't actually keep up with them because she can't connect with them the same way she can connect to Riley, another queer girl.
Well, it's also interesting too because that whole game is focusing, and you somewhat write about this too, Jacqueline, but about sort of Ellie's radicalization throughout that game, and how she's spending time with Riley, because she seems very, in the beginning, not naive, maybe that's the wrong word, but a lot more innocent than we know her to be in the main game. And as she's sort of spending more time with Riley, and on this day that they get bitten, you can see how she becomes more and more, I guess, what's the word I'm looking for?
Not like maybe like more jaded or
yeah, like just jaded with the world, and almost like to the point where she doesn't really seem to have, like, she's jaded with the world, but not even just that. It's just that she doesn't really have so much of an opinion of anything, I guess, at first. But then as the game goes on, you can see how we see later in the main game, like, how her thoughts are shaped based on this experience with Riley, based on getting bitten, and the choice, like, how she wants to help the Fireflies. She never explicitly says it, but I think it's fair to say that she's ready to give her life for this cause, if it means finding a cure and a vaccine. And I think that's very telling based on the DLC, seeing her like so sort of innocent and naive, and then going to be like, yes, I am sure of this. This is what I want to do.
See, calling her jaded at like by the end is like I would actually interpret it kind of the opposite way, mostly because of like the way Riley's speech like at the end comes across, because Riley's speech is like the most hopeful thing, and I feel like it actually like helps give Ellie like a desire to find a purpose within the world for herself, and like she ends up doing this by like trying to give her life like to like for the cure and getting to the Fireflies. And like, you know, I'm trying to remember those last few lines, just because like the lines about like just how it's not important to it's not important whether or not the last few lines about how she shouldn't like take the easy way out, and how the more important thing for her to do is to spend the last few moments she can with someone that she loves, and to make those dying moments count more than like just giving her life.
Are you talking about the lines where Riley's like, let's lose our minds together, it'll be all poetic? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think actually, now that you say that, maybe jaded was the wrong word, because I was thinking of jaded in more of a sense of like kind of jaded with the world around her, but I guess I should have been more explicit about that. Not jaded about her feelings. Like, I think she is more aware of it. Like, jaded with the world, but now that she's had this experience, she is much more intentional. Maybe that's a better word to use about all of this, and her feelings about it. Like, she's not in the middle anymore. It's almost like she's not a centrist anymore, right? She chose a side. But yeah.
It was nice to see Ellie actually codified as a queer character, because I think there had been some interviews and stuff where it had been alluded to by Jacqueline, but it hadn't actually been said, and it was very much a Dumbledore situation where it was, no, she's totally queer. Yeah, it's a thing. We'll get around to it. We'll talk about it later. Just don't worry about it. Like, that's not very satisfying as a queer protagonist. It's not really nice to see that sidelined and told that, we'll get to it later. So it's nice to see that was actually put in the text. Yes, this is official, this is real, this is canon. So I was really happy with that. As for everything else, I thought it was a really cute side story. I thought it was nice. It was really nice to take a quieter moment in The Last of Us. in the arcade is just, it's adorable. It's a story of tragic love that is going to end poorly. There is no way that this is going to end well, but it was still a really beautiful little moment that I got to spend with them.
Yeah. I guess if we want to critique Left Behind, like, as a whole, I don't think that, like, the time we spend in, like, the, like, I guess present mall with, like, Joel is necessary. Like, I kind of wish that wouldn't be there at all, because, like, I would much rather just spend, like, an hour and a half walking around a safe mall with Riley and then, like, have the ending happen. I don't feel like I need more, like, I don't feel like I need gameplay in the sense of, like, fighting and combat.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. I mean, I guess they wanted to, like, somehow, like, almost in their minds give a reason for it existing by sort of intertwining it. But I agree. I think it doesn't detract from it. It's just, it does sort of feel jarring going between the two stories sometimes, because the one is so, I'm going to say, I mean, it's not combat heavy, but in comparison to the other one, to the flashback sections, it is pretty combat heavy, and it just feels, it's just a little jarring at times. I like the quiet moments.
Yeah.
But I also think that maybe the expectations, maybe they thought that, I don't necessarily agree with this, but they probably thought that maybe people would be upset if it was just that. I mean, because you know how people get upset about things like being quote-unquote walking simulators.
I do think that, like, there would have been some gamers mad online about not getting their money's worth because, like, there's no quote-unquote gameplay.
Yeah.
Yeah, no doubt about that.
I'm going to say it, hot take here. In that DLC, Joel is the unnecessary straight character. Wasn't necessary to the story. We didn't need him. Didn't need him.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, so true. Well, I guess too, they're like trying to find a way to like, because I guess it's sort of what people call, I don't really agree with this, but like a plot hole, because we never see how Ellie gets Joel from point A to point B. Like, what happened in that section? Ooh, like...
It's called a time skip. It's a narrative device.
Yeah.
Right.
I love when people are like, here's this plot hole, and really it's just a perfectly plausible thing happened and we didn't see it. Like,
right.
Because it would have been boring to see, probably, and unnecessary. Yeah. And the authors did you a favor.
Right.
Thank you,
it turns out it was boring and unnecessary to see.
Yeah, it turns out it would have been shit. Yes.
Roasted.
Yeah, roasted.
I could talk a bit about where the DLC came from if you want, Danielle, like, because it was based on the original idea for the game.
Oh, sure. Yeah, go ahead.
So, by a bit of background, I kind of alluded to it before, but basically when Jacqueline first pitched this game, the original game rather than the DLC, way back when, the original concept was this game called Mankind, and the idea was that it was a zombie apocalypse game, and basically the world had gone to shit. The world had ended in the same way The Last of Us has, but only women got infected, so men were immune. And Ellie was the only immune woman. And that was like the plot of the game. You were this gruff police officer. Yeah.
Oh god, that would have been so bad.
Yeah.
So would have been Lisa the Painful RPG, that AAA.
Yeah. Sort of. He's learned, listen, the reason he pitched it at the time, and pretty much every female employee at Naughty Dog was like, you cannot make this fucking thing. What are you talking about?
Yeesh.
But the idea was like that this gruff police officer that you were playing, so the Joel type, would have a heart condition, and you would play as him for the most part, but periodically his heart condition would be really bad, and you would have to play as Ellie for small sections and like take over. And that was where the idea for the DLC came from, or like that section where Joel is unconscious, is like a throwback to that original idea, but with like way less sexism. But yeah, that was like the origin story of it, which I just find really interesting given how exactly everything you guys were talking about, in contrast to like his original pitch that was possibly the opposite of all of those things. Yeah, just interesting. Probably proof that people can grow and change, I would imagine.
Yeah, that is some major, like, that's that deserves a most improved trophy for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Real quick, I just want to touch actually on an article that Bez writes: "Queers in Love at the End of the World." Has anybody heard of this game?
No, I haven't. I want to.
Googling it right now, but
I've heard of it. I have not heard anything about it.
Bez, I'm wondering, do you mind talking about the game briefly? Because I think it actually ties in kind of nicely to Left Behind.
Yeah. So it's this twine game by Anne Anthropy, who's this trans game developer who's mostly known for the game Dysphoria. But she did this game for Ludlum Dare one year. The theme was 10 seconds. So the idea in this game is that you are a queer person at the end of the world with your lover, and you have 10 seconds to just have that final moment with them. And you can do basically whatever you want. You can fuck, you can kiss, you can just stand there and hold hands. You can just, there's like a barrage of options. I never seen all the content in this game because it's 10 seconds and there's so much to do that it's impossible to see it all. So basically it's trying to capture that one apocalyptic moment of love at the end, despite it all. So that's what the game is. I'll link it to y'all. It's a very good game and it's very short to experience.
I just played it while you were talking, actually. I really like it.
What'd you do?
Started to fuck, but died.
Damn.
Yeah, that happens.
I mean, we've all been there. Yeah, we've all been
that's just Thursday night, isn't it? Yeah.
But yeah, so I will link it.
Yeah, I just find it really interesting. The reason I wanted to bring that up is because, while Left Behind is not quite as innovative as that, I think that it's interesting how both of the games are examining, for Ellie at least, what feels like the end of the world before she realizes that she's immune. And this is something I thought about like way after, like when because when I first read this article, Bez, like I hadn't replayed Left Behind, so I didn't think about it that way. And obviously, like, the article is just talking about this game, but I think it's actually kind of fitting, to be honest. And anyway, I still haven't played the game, which is like a sad excuse, especially since Jacqueline literally just played it while we were talking. So I'm gonna have to get on that. But I just thought it was interesting that that's the game that you ended up writing about, and this game is also somewhat dealing with it. In a minor way, of course. But,
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and it's a very good piece. So I would, well, obviously you can't read it yet, but you'll see it soon.
I look forward to that.
And one final thing I want to talk about, since we're still talking about the topic of queerness, I want to talk about Bill in relation to Travis's article, which is fantastic, by the way.
Thank you.
In fact, let me bring this up real quick. My favorite part, I mean, I love the whole article, but let me actually read the final sentence, which is, "I will do what Bill taught me and learn to craft a nail bomb, or at least paint my nails something explosive." That is a fantastic sentence. Like,
That's a mic drop right there.
I freaking love that. I just wanted to highlight that on the show. But anyway, I'm wondering, I know for me, when I first played the game, I heard Bill say partner, and my ears kind of like lit up and was like, wait, what? What did he just say? And I'm wondering what other people, and I guess we can start with Travis, like just their thoughts of playing the game the first time and what they thought Bill's sexuality was, if they thought about it at all.
Yeah, I on my first playthrough, I definitely presumed him to be just completely straight, or maybe asexual, or I don't know, whatever, but not necessarily interested in men, because when does video games ever talk about that? Because that's not a thing. And I'm very used to seeing queer men caricaturized in these ways, like I talk about in the article. They're either hyper feminine or hyper masculine, these bizarre gender presentations. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, because I love drag. I love drag in all of its forms, but it's not a realistic portrayal of characters. And I just my straight wash brain did not see him as gay until I saw the gay porn at the end of it. You know, I heard the word partner and I assumed it was business partner because, you know, as much as I thought that there could have been one day a relationship between Tess and Joel, that's not really where they were at. And they were business partners. They had a smuggling operation, and we knew that Bill and Frank were helping to get them their supplies into the quarantine zone. So that's kind of how I read it. But then you see how he reacts when he sees Frank's body, and the way that he says, well, you know, fuck you too, Frank. I never loved you anyways. And it's that need to hurt someone in the way that they've hurt you that made me think, oh, no, he actually cared about him in a really deep and passionate way. Because you wouldn't say that about your business partner. Like, you just wouldn't. You don't care that much. You don't have that kind of relationship with them. So that's where sort of I saw that turning point and where I recontextualized Bill. Then I play it on later playthroughs and I see how integral it is to his character. And like the fact that he says something about how he sleeps in a confession booth. Like, you sleep in a closet of shame? Like, that is the queerest thing I can possibly imagine. The fact that you live in this town where you feel the need to defend yourself with like a moat of zombies around you, and you've set traps everywhere, and you're picking probably the least defensible location, which is this church, and that's where you're gonna lay your head down. Like, that's extremely queer to me, that he feels this shame and guilt about who he is and who he loves. So yeah, that's how I see Bill anyways.
Well, speaking of shame, I'm ashamed to say that I didn't notice it until I read your article.
Really? Interesting.
Yeah, so obviously on my first playthrough years ago, I wouldn't have necessarily picked up on it, but not even when Ellie pulled out the gay porn did I notice, because it's just, I guess it was just so ingrained in my head, and I wasn't thinking in that way that he might possibly be queer.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm just better at noticing lesbians. Who knows?
The gaydar is only attuned to a certain setting.
Be the queers you want to see in the world.
Yeah. Did anybody else? I'm interested, Sam and David, if you even thought about it beforehand, or what you thought at first.
I will say that I didn't notice it when I first played it, but when I first played it, I was also still knee-deep in evangelicalism. My life and outlook on the world has changed a lot since then. I wasn't at a point where I would have been upset about it or anything, but certainly a point where I would have been less receptive and less able to notice it. And then, eventually it was pointed out to me, and then I played it again, and I'm like, oh yeah, okay. But yeah, I can't speak to I don't want to try and speak too much to just how it was handled and stuff because I'm a straight dude, but yeah, it's definitely something noticeable, but something that I did not notice when I first played.
Interesting. I don't know, I had probably what I imagine is the most typical experience of it, which is kind of what Travis was alluding to, which is I kind of played it, and the moment I picked up the note where it was just it's the petty, vindictive, I must hurt you like you hurt me. I was like, oh, they were absolutely in a relationship, but it didn't even ding in my it wasn't even I wasn't like, oh, they've been queer coded. I just didn't think about it. I was like, yeah, makes sense. I just kind of kept going through, but that's probably just the mode which I play games is through the. I'm always running it through the crit lens, so I just went, that's not pertinent to what I'm thinking about it at this moment, if that makes sense. I was just that's cool, but I'm going to focus on this stuff. So yeah, I just thought it was I didn't really think anything particular of it, but was aware of it.
Almost as if it's nuanced storytelling.
Oh
that
my
games
God.
don't see a lot of queer characters.
Oh my God, could you imagine?
What? No. I don't believe it.
I will go ahead and say that I never have the heart to give him the note, so maybe that's why I never noticed. Because, I just can't do it.
You're a way better person than I am.
Me too. Yep.
I was you got to know about this, man. You got to know about it.
Yeah, I just generally tend toward tell everyone everything in video games. That's only come back to bite me in the ass a couple times.
Yeah, I usually give him the note. The last playthrough I didn't just because I know what happens. So I was like, oh, this time I'll spare Bill because I don't want to be mean this time around. So we've had a long conversation now, and there's no way we're going to touch on everything in my outline. So
yeah, we did kind of take off with all that, didn't we?
Yeah, but that's a good thing, you know? And honestly, I would have been surprised if we did touch on everything on the outline. One thing I want to briefly say before getting to the ending is that something that we won't have time to talk about, but I just want to highlight, is that one of the writers for the issue, Matt, is not here right now, but he wrote an excellent article about doomerism and ecofascism and how it kind of relates to the story of The Last of Us, and it is such a good article. So I encourage everybody listening to read it because it's so good. I know we really didn't get to talk about it tonight, but I would highly recommend, well, really read all the articles in the issue, but since he's not here, I definitely want to give a shout out to Matt. It's a very good article. Okay, so you don't have to have played the sequel, and I don't even want the sequel to be a part of this. And we somewhat touched on it a little, but based on just The Last of Us and Left Behind, not the sequel, do you think that the game needed a sequel?
Absolutely not in any way.
Yeah,
no.
And The Last of Us 2 is amazing, and I love it, and it did not need to exist.
Yeah, that's the thing. I feel it's the type of game that you could expand on, but also that just absolutely did not need expanding on. It stands on its own very well.
Yeah, I very rarely think that something ends up needing a sequel. Having played through it, I feel like there's very few games out there that need sequels, that need to have them. That doesn't mean it's a bad idea to create them. God knows I love Kingdom Hearts and all of its unnecessary sequels that it has, but...
disagree, but go ahead.
I mean, I love it. I'm a huge Kingdom Hearts stan. Don't get me wrong.
Fight.
But you know, I very rarely think that. Like, there's the only times I can think of it is when it's being treated more like a TV series and that it's episodic, like the Telltale games, where one piece is not part of the whole. But that's very rare in gaming. And despite the fact that they've called it Part 2, I wouldn't call it. I wouldn't call it entirely necessary. And to have that, I loved it. I actually, despite the fact that it was problematic in some places, but I still did love it. But that doesn't mean it was necessary, or I would have been unhappy or unfulfilled having never played it.
Yeah, I'm kind of with all of you in this one. Like, it didn't need a sequel. And again, I say that as somebody since I just played the game earlier this year, I really hadn't been keeping up with sequel news or anything like that. So kind of the reason I actually played the game finally was like, oh, the sequel's coming out. I should probably play the first one, then play the sequel. So, like, I didn't get really to think about it that long, but my thought at the end of it was like, where could they possibly take this? Like, and I enjoyed the sequel quite a bit, so, but I don't think it was necessary, despite what Druckmann says.
Despite the lies he's told since, yes.
I think that there's something that, like, your mileage may vary on this depending on how much you like or dislike The Last of Us Part 2, and I do, in all fairness, think that it's a good enough game that it doesn't probably fall entirely into this category, but I think that sometimes there are sequels that are good, but also, in a way, like, the original thing stands better on its own than it does with this other thing added on. And like I said, The Last of Us Part 2 is probably better than to fully fall into that category, but I still feel like there's a degree to which the ambiguity of the ending and such in The Last of Us is obviously kind of harmed by, like, it doesn't stand on its own in the same way with the sequel existing. It's certainly not as extreme an example as, like, the Prince of Persia games where, like, Sands of Time is just much better standing on its own than with Warrior Within in existence. But, like...
what was the Two Thrones? Is that the one after that?
Yeah, that was the third one.
Yeah, yikes.
That series is just a whole thing. But, like, I do feel like the first one stands on its own well enough that Part 2, well, I think at least a pretty good game, also, like, is... not just unnecessary, but to a degree maybe sort of, like, yeah, man, it doesn't make the first game worse in hindsight. That's way too critical. I guess just I think that the first one not only didn't need a sequel, but stands on its own so well that there's something lost in it for having a continuation of the story to some degree.
That's absolutely how I feel about it as well. I find the whole thing fascinating because obviously Sony there was always going to be a sequel. Like the first game sold 20 million copies, which for a narrative third-person action game is fucking unbelievable. Like any AAA studio would kill for those kind of numbers. So there was always going to be one because we live in capitalism and art doesn't count. But there's something about the fact that, yeah, you're right. There's something about having a sequel that means there are things in the first game that are like lost in translation, even in hindsight or like retrospectively. This is going to be a super dumb analogy, but I'm going to use it anyway. Honestly, the sequel reminds me the most of The Little Mermaid 2.
Yes. Yes.
Oh no.
Yeah, because listen, The Little Mermaid is fucking great. All right, don't get me twisted. I fucking love The Little Mermaid, but Little Mermaid 2 as a sequel it's so objectively different than the first one. Like it's exploring such different things. It's just in the same world that it's almost not a sequel at all. It's almost just like in the same way that like Fantastic Beasts or whatever is like just like it's just part of the same universe as Harry Potter. Like Little Mermaid 2 it recontextualizes some stuff about the first one where you learn about what this character grew up to be like and what their type of life ended up being. And it doesn't detract from the first movie, but the first one loses something by not being allowed to just exist by itself. And I feel The Last of Us Part 2 is probably like the most obvious example of that. It's clearly trying to do something different than the first one, but there are things it does to justify its own existence, and in doing so over-explain some things that were best left untouched. And that's where regardless of the content of the second one, if it's just the concept of like, should a sequel exist, I think the question is always, is there something further to say about this thematically? And if the answer is yes, then okay, is that a story we can tell with the same characters? If the answer is still yes, then yes, do a sequel, or do a Red Dead 2 thing where you do like a semi-prequel sequel thing. The Last of Us Part 2, like I think they were done. And like you can see that from the rotation of all of the key staff and the directors and that sort of thing, and the way that the core group of the people making the first game broke up afterwards. They were clearly finished. Like one of the key leads left video games for good. Like this was like a project that was like a cap in the feather of Naughty Dog, and it was completely finished. And it feels like that when you play it. Like it feels finished, and that's where I tend to agree with Sam to a greater extent. It does, yeah. The first game seems less for the existence of the second game, even though the second game doesn't necessarily detract from what's there.
Interestingly enough, sorry, go ahead.
You do kind of have to wonder how much of the staff leaving may have been due to mistreatment of workers and other labor issues like that, though.
That's fair.
Yeah, a lot of... I did a podcast with Danielle about this a week or so ago, but it seems to me that whatever information is surfaced about that, the reliability of that is pretty questionable. I mean, Amy Hennig's departure before, like at the tail end of Last of Us Part, or The Last of Us 4, like that seems to intimate that these labor issues are pretty well accepted in the software and startup space, and to what extent the staff leaving was related to that or related to the fact that Bruce Straley left. It seems more likely that it was because of Straley's departure rather than the labor disputes, but the narrative has been rewritten since that it was like they treated them like shit and that's why they left. It was that they treated them like shit and the guy they wanted to work for left. It seems both. Is my interpretation of at least the information that we can verify that's come out of that. There's also all sorts of unverifiable allegations and stuff, but yeah, it's an interesting question as well.
Yeah, if you're interested in all that, I'll put a link once that podcast is out. That David and I record together, because David went into a lot of research about Druckmann and that his time at like Naughty Dog and stuff, and it's very interesting. Stuff that I certainly did not know at all. But yeah.
I was thinking Oh, sorry, I'll
No.
keep it short. I was thinking it's
No,
really
go.
interesting how we're talking about the sequel being sort of unnecessary to compare to Naughty Dog's own other PS4 game, where Uncharted 4, frankly, feels like an ending that the series kind of sorely needed, for me at least. It seemed, especially by 3, that it was just sort of going and not really going anywhere in particular. And then 4 showed up. They had clearly learned a lot of lessons about storytelling from when they had made The Last of Us, and you could tell, and it actually sort of guided itself towards what I thought at least was a rather satisfying conclusion. And like that was a sequel that I think makes the series better for it. And it's just kind of interesting that the 2 games that the studio made this generation, that and also Uncharted The Lost Legacy, which is absolutely fantastic, and I wish more people played it. It's just an Uncharted game where you play as 2 women of color who are griping about how much Nathan Drake sucks, and I love it.
Yes.
It's fantastic, but point being that it's interesting that we've got sort of these very different case studies in how sequels relate to their original material from the same developer in the same video game. What's the word? A generation. I don't know why that word was skipping my mind, but
even made perhaps more interesting by the fact that the team that finished off Uncharted 4 weren't the original people that made it, and the people that made The Last of Us Part 2 weren't the original people that made The Last of Us. So there's some mirroring there as well, which is fascinating.
Yeah.
All right. Any other final thoughts before we wrap this up?
Definitely watch The Little Mermaid 2. It's really good.
Oh my god. A+ way to end this.
I'm out here being a stand for it, I tell you what.
Well, now that we've hit the topic of unsatisfying endings...
Look, the more we can talk about Disney sequels on this show, the happier I'll be. So
just going to do another podcast just talking about that.
I mean, briefly, I did have a podcast called Did We Need That Sequel? I'm not saying it's good, but it is on iTunes.
And Danielle, did we need that sequel?
Little Mermaid 2. Look, I really enjoyed it as a 10-year-old. For that reason, I'll say yeah.
Yes.
Oh, gosh.
But no.
Damn it.
But if we're talking about The Last of Us 2, no. Or Part 2, sorry. But yeah. I'm going to shout out Beauty and the Beast, The Enchanted Christmas, but that's just me.
I mean, in all fairness, that movie is worth it for Evil Pyborg and Tim Curry.
Yes.
It's awful, but it's worth it for that.
It's so good.
Yeah.
So many people worked on that. So many people.
So that ends our discussion on The Last of Us. We got into a lot of stuff, and I thought it was a good discussion. So once again, everybody, thank you for coming on the show, and thank you for writing for Level Story. If we could go around real quick, so everybody can tell the audience where they can find you online. How about, okay, I'm just going to go down my row, so I'll say your name, and you can say where everybody can find you. So let's start with David.
So the best place to find me at the moment is zeroindent.com, and if you enjoy this kind of discussion where it's not just like a homogenous, like this is what everyone thinks, it's the media criticism of the verb, not the noun. We focus on discourse that perhaps is a little bit more concerned with craft and the way things make you feel rather than just scoring it out of 10. Danielle's probably writing a few pieces for us on there as well. You can also find me at maynardtrigg.com if you want to buy my novel. It's like a low sci-fi, fantasy, steampunk adventure story. Or at Twitter at DCM I Hate Pie.
Awesome. Where can they find you, Jacqueline?
You can find me most easily and readily on Twitter at Jacqueline Film, JACQUELINE Film. And if you want to find my work, the best place to go is my YouTube channel, which you can find a link to on my Twitter. And you should watch my videos if you like really long video essays about Kingdom Hearts, because I'm working on a 4-hour video about Kingdom Hearts 2.
I cannot wait for that.
Yay!
Danielle, did you
Already
wish really
hyped.
hard?
What? Yes. Look, I love Jacqueline's videos, so this is gonna be amazing. Very excited. All right, how about you, Bez? Where can people find you?
Well, I am Naomi Norbez on Twitter. and norbiz.itch.io for my games. Yeah, so my Twitter is NAOMINORBEZ, and then my itch account is NORBEZ.itch.io.
I'd like to throw out a quick, Bez has got some pretty great games on there, actually, and I'd recommend checking them out.
Aw, that's really nice.
Just a quick endorsement.
Thanks. My most recent project is a Neopets tribute, but it's not on my page yet. It's on, because it's for the interactive fiction competition, so little.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, thanks.
All right, awesome. How about you, Travis?
So I am the co-host of a podcast called Rainbow Road, which is about queerness in gaming. You can check us out on any podcatcher that you've got, Spotify, Apple, Stitcher, any of those things. You can find us on Twitter at Rainbow Road Pod, or myself, if you really want to, at Travis Ryans, TravisRyans. Although, if you're looking for gaming content, check us out on Rainbow Road. If you're looking for angry political rants and inside jokes about what it's like to work on a film set, then you could follow my personal if you really wanted to.
Awesome. And then how about you, Sam?
I am... my sort of main thing is on YouTube, Games is Lit 101, just a whole bunch of video essays about video games as a storytelling medium and some deep dives into the stories of some games, most recent being Final Fantasy VII. It's an hour and a half long, so I apologize, but...
It deserves
worth it.
It deserves to be that long. It's amazing.
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate that. And then on Twitter at Games is Lit. It's kind of... I have a Facebook page too, but I usually forget that I have a Facebook page, so you can too.
That's fair.
Yeah, YouTube and Twitter are the main things, so that... Oh, and a Patreon, of course, but yeah. Just search Games is Lit 101, you'll find it.
And then, of course, if you're interested in anything Level Story, Level Story Mag is my Twitter handle, and of course you can find all of the magazine content in this podcast at levelstory.net, and of course listen to the podcasts on all the major podcatcher sites. But anyway, that ends our conversation. Again, thanks for joining me, everyone. This was a lot of fun. Hope everybody enjoyed it. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right. That was our conversation about The Last of Us and The Last of Us Left Behind. So to learn more about all of the kind folks who joined our conversation, see their links in the show notes for this episode. And that brings us to a close. So before we leave, Sam, do you want to plug anything? I know you have a new video. Wow.
Weird. Now that I think about it, I guess it's true that between recording that conversation and this, I did put out a video about The Last of Us Part 2.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's I saw a lot of criticisms of The Last of Us Part 2 being like it's sort of a cheap, heavy-handed guilt trip on the player, and I didn't honestly think that really checked out. It's, as I said in the thing, not a perfect game. It's got problems, but I don't think that is one of them. So I made a video about it, just kind of exploring the idea of what it means for a game to be addressing the player versus inspiring feelings in the player about a linear story and characters and such. And it's been, I think that I say some things that I like, and if anyone is interested in The Last of Us Part 2, they should give it a watch. It's just on my channel, Games is Lit 101 on YouTube.
Awesome. And we'll put a link to that in the show notes as well, so you can watch that. I haven't watched it yet because I'm kind of mentally preparing to write something on The Last of Us Part 2 still. So once I write that, then I'll watch it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, but until then, I'm looking forward to it. It's like one of the many Last of Us Part 2 videos I just have in my queue.
there are a lot of them about now. I took my time on this one, so...
Oh, yeah. But it'll be a good watch, I'm sure. And yeah, we gave our plugs at the end of our discussion, so you know where to find us. If you are interested in rating the show, which I highly recommend because, it really helps Level Story out, you can rate us with 5 stars over on iTunes or Apple Podcasts. I'm not sure exactly what people are calling it now, to be honest, but either one of those things. 5 stars helps people find the show. It gets people actually coming to it, so it really helps us out. And with all of that, I think that brings us to the end of our episode. So once again, thanks Sam for coming on.
Yes, happy to join as always.
Yeah, and we will talk to you all later. Happy gaming, everyone.